Chapter 1352. His senses surged inside and outside of his body. The endless space-time hidden in the depths of his body was revealed bit by bit under his senses. For Luo Fan, who had completely integrated all his cultivation achievements into himself, his control over his own body had already reached an unimaginable level. Being flawless and unhindered represented absolute control over one's own body and self. These space-times were naturally included in it. Even ordinary people knew that the interior of a human body was a small universe. When one cultivated to the level 3 pseudo-saint level existence like Luo Fan, this small universe would have already grown into a large universe. The endless space-time contained within was like an infinite number of small worlds hidden in this large universe. Inside these small worlds, light and shadow were constantly changing, and there were countless bizarre scenes. One could even see countless living beings living inside, but these living beings were not real living beings. Although it was extremely easy for Luo Fan to create a boundless world and endless living beings, it did not mean that he would create such a world and such real living beings in his own body. This was a body, not a real universe. He did not have the thought of nurturing endless living beings in his body. Therefore, these creatures seemed to be real. They seemed to have millions of strange shapes and forms, and they seemed to have formed an unbelievable and complete civilization. However, they were actually just projections that evolved from a certain aspect of Luo Fan's thoughts. Each of these phantoms was the manifestation of a certain fragment of Luo Fan's thoughts. The civilization and world formed by endless living beings could be said to be Luo Fan's thoughts. This was Luo Fan's will. Of course, this was only a characteristic and did not mean that Luo Fan's thoughts and will were really them. He thoroughly examined the many space-times in his body. This was the first time for Luo Fan. After all, this did not mean much to him. All of his cultivation achievements were naturally integrated into these space-times. Naturally, these space-times would improve along with his cultivation level, and then he would thoroughly investigate these space-times. To him, it was just an increase in his workload. It wouldn't bring much change to his cultivation. Sensing the many spaces in his body that were hidden in different depths, Luo Fan gradually had a feeling that he was traveling in the universe and watching a boundless world. Every single one of these countless space-times, they could make Luo Fan feel an indescribable vibration, and they could produce an indescribable resonance with a certain part of his soul. Through this space-time, he felt that he had suddenly gained a deeper understanding of his own soul. All kinds of incredible things were happening between the countless creatures in the countless space-times. Some of them were beautiful, some were ugly, some shone with the brilliance of humanity, and some vividly evolved the darkness of a human heart. In this, Luo Fan could see his own shadow in every creature, even if their personalities were the complete opposite of his. He could feel that they were a part of him. Looking at these countless space-times and creatures, Luo Fan suddenly felt that he was looking at an endless number of himself. He even felt like these were the feelings of his countless previous lives. Everyone had previous lives, and in these countless previous lives, anyone could have any kind of identity. In this way, if countless of himself from his previous lives appeared in one world at the same time, they would certainly be able to form a complete world. They would be able to form a complete civilization. Among them, he would be the one who killed, the one who saved, the one who loved, the one who hated, the one who envied, the one who despised. Everything would happen to him, and all the emotions would be directed at him. On the other hand, if everyone in any world seemed to be a part of him, then these would become his countless previous lives. Luo Fan's perception continued to penetrate deep into his body, exploring layer after layer of space-time, digging layer after layer, constantly exploring the deepest part of his body. Using his perception of the two holy wills, he continued to trace the source, trying hard to find the existence of the two holy wills. Luo Fan did not study much about the space-time inside other people's bodies. However, He found that the inside of his body was divided into 1,296 layers among them. Each layer had countless spacetimes, forming a complete layer, or in other words, a vast and boundless universe. In this way, as the number of layers increased, the number of spacetimes in each layer would also constantly decrease. However, even at the 1,296 spacetime layers, which had the least number of spacetimes, the number of spacetimes in each layer was still a terrifying number that could be calculated by tens of millions. The 1,296 spacetime layers, this was the deepest spacetime layer that Luo Fan could currently sense. Because it was within his body, the tens of millions of spacetimes in the spacetime layer were completely detailed in his perception. All the spacetimes and the figures of all the living beings in them instantly appeared in his heart, and he instantly grasped all the special and unusual aspects of them. The deeper the spacetime layer, the more part of Luo Fan that the figures of the living beings in it would contain. In other words, the deeper the spacetime layer, the more the living beings in it would touch the depths of Luo Fan's heart. The feeling that they were his previous lives would also become more and more obvious when he observed them. If someone could reach this level and conduct a detailed analysis of these living beings, they would definitely be able to easily analyze Luo Fan's character, and might even be able to use this analysis to regain all of Luo Fan's memories. As expected, they aren't here. After carefully sensing everything in this space-time layer, Luo Fan knew that what he was looking for, the two holy wills, were not here. This was also normal. If it was here, it would be normal. If they were here, he would not need to come here to search at all. As long as the two holy wills entered here, he would naturally be able to sense them and would naturally be able to easily capture their traces. If they weren't here, then they could only be in a deeper layer. In Luo Fan's perception, there were only 1,296 space-time layers in his body. There were only 1,296 layers of time and space in his body. The deeper layers were like the universe outside of human observation. Perhaps there were, or perhaps it was very big. Perhaps they were very small. In other words, for Luo Fan, the next layer of space-time might have existed or it might not have. If there was, it might only be one layer. There might also be countless layers. Luo Fan, who had long since expected this, was not discouraged. Instead, with a thought, his perception directly condensed a body that belonged to him in this space-time layer. After all, the space-time layer belonged to Luo Fan's body. Here, Luo Fan was as supreme and omnipotent as Pangu in the prehistoric world. There was nothing he didn't know, and there was nothing he didn't know. His strand of perception wasn't powerful. If it was in an ordinary space-time, even if it could condense into his figure, it would be extremely weak. A few ripples of space-time would be enough to destroy it. But here he was floating in the boundless void, watching the millions of space-time layers glittering in the void, flickering with an indescribable light. It quietly illuminated the entire space-time, shining on his body. Occasionally, the many space-time layers, which were powerful enough to destroy the world, communicated with each other and directly swept past Luo Fan's perception incarnation. But it could not hurt his perception incarnation in the slightest, and it could not even touch his perception incarnation. Luo Fan did not pay much attention to this. Right now, all his thoughts were focused on what was beneath his feet, on the deeper layer of space-time that was unknown to him. How should I go down? Luo Fan's eyes flickered with boundless light as he thought to himself. The two faintly discernible holy wills were still enveloping him, but these two holy wills did not give him any direction. It felt as if they had directly enveloped the entire space-time layer, allowing any living beings in this space-time layer to sense their existence. However, no matter how hard they tried, they could not find out where the holy wills were coming from. Under such circumstances, it was obviously impossible for Luo Fan to discover the deeper space-time layer based on the holy will's senses. With a thought, Luo Fan raised his hand and waved it gently. Countless rays of light shone in front of him, and a mysterious formation appeared in front of him. This formation was extremely complicated, and the fine lines were so dense that they seemed solid. At first glance, the entire formation looked like an extremely dense, huge sphere. Faced with this formation, Luo Fan casually patted it, and countless spiritual lights poured into it. The formation was instantly activated after receiving the spiritual lights, and the spiritual lights that Luo Fan had sent into it began to move rapidly according to each fine line on the formation. The entire process of moving and changing was as if an invisible hand had grabbed them in the void of the universe and used the entire universe as a canvas to create an extremely grand and vast work of art. This was a deduction formation. The reason why Luo Fan had set up this formation was because he wanted to use this deduction formation to deduce the existence of the next space-time layer. The spiritual lights that he had poured into this deduction formation contained nothing else but the mysteries of the 1,296 space-time layers that he had experienced previously. With his current perceptual ability, it was extremely difficult, even close to impossible, to discover the next space-time layer. This was because this space-time layer was actually his current limit. However, using a formation was different. This deduction formation's function was actually similar to that of an ordinary computer, and there was no essential difference. For an ordinary computer, even a person without any computing ability would be able to calculate mathematical problems that were far beyond their comprehension. By the same logic, the formation that Luo Fan had set up could also do what Luo Fan could not do at the moment. It could sort out the changing patterns of the 1,296 spacetime layers, and then use this pattern to deduce how to reach the next spacetime layer. This was not because the deduction ability of this formation was better than that of Luo Fan. It was because this array could be repeated countless times according to the most basic rules, and it could be repeated at an incomparably fast speed. This was something that Luo Fan could not do, or rather, he was not willing to do it. After setting up the formation and pouring the spiritual lights into it, Luo Fan's perceptual incarnation quietly floated there, motionless, watching the spiritual lights swimming in the formation's trajectory become more and more mysterious. The speed of the swimming became faster and faster. In the depths of one's own space-time, it was actually similar to the depths of one's own consciousness. In other words, in such a situation, time was completely idealistic. If 1 second in the outside world was compared to billions of years here, that was just a matter of thought. If 1 second in the outside world was compared to billions of years here, that was just a matter of thought. If 1 second in the outside world was compared to billions of years here, that was just a matter of thought. However, normally speaking, unless one had no business and felt that there was no meaning in living, one would not use the latter effect of 1 second in the inside world being compared to billions of years outside, for example, the one that Luo Fan was using now. 1 second in the outside world was equivalent to billions of years here. Deducing the changing rules of the 1296 layers of space-time was a rather complicated matter. It involved various factors, and at least had to be calculated in billions of trillions. Even if this formation that Luo Fan had set up had an unimaginably powerful deduction ability, it was impossible for it to give Luo Fan any results in a short period of time. When the mysteries of the 1296 layers of space-time were truly sorted out, tens of millions of years had passed in the 1296 layers space-time. Of course, for the outside world, only less than a second had passed. For Luo Fan, this was really nothing. Deducing these changing rules was naturally not the end, but only the beginning. After spending tens of millions of years to obtain such a result, Luo Fan persisted and let the formation continue to deduce. In the end, it took more than 1 billion years. That formation used that rule to find an invisible passage to the 1297 layer of space-time in Luo Fan's body in the 1296 layer of space-time. This formless passageway was extremely thin and insignificant. Even an ant in the mortal world would not be able to pass through it. Compared to an ant in the mortal world, it was hundreds of millions of times bigger. Even if it was Luo Fan, it would be almost impossible to find such a narrow passage if he searched by himself. There were tens of millions of space-time here, and each of those space-time had an almost infinite amount of land. The nothingness that existed in these space-time was a vast existence that could envelop the tens of millions of space-time. Under such circumstances, one could imagine how difficult it was to find an existence that was hundreds of millions of times smaller than an ant in this layer of space-time. If Luo Fan had not been a level 3 pseudo-saint, and his perception and observation abilities had reached an almost heaven-defying level, he might have directly said that it was impossible. So that's how it is? Through the feedback from the formation, Luo Fan could not help but smile bitterly. Fortunately, he had given the formation enough time. Otherwise, even with such a formation, it would be difficult for him to find the existence of such a small passage. With a thought, Luo Fan put away the array. His perception incarnation took a step forward and instantly entered a seemingly ordinary space-time among the millions of space-times. He appeared in a seemingly ordinary valley in this space-time. According to the result of the formation's deduction, the passage was in this valley. Even in this valley, it's not that easy to find the passage. Looking at this extremely ordinary valley full of wildflowers and weeds, Luo Fan smiled bitterly. However, this time, he did not need to look for it himself. He followed the feedback from the formation and slowly moved in a certain direction. After a few dozen breaths, he stopped in front of a fist-sized stone. This stone was not a passage. The passage was pressed under the stone. With a slight thought, the stone turned into nothingness, and everything under the stone was revealed in an instant. Luo Fan's eyesight had reached an unimaginable level. No matter how small an object was, it could still be seen with a single glance. Even an existence that was millions of times smaller than an ant could be seen in the same way. Under such circumstances, he instantly saw the unimaginably small passage that was directly exposed in front of him. It's really here. Looking at this small passage, the bitter smile on Luo Fan's face gradually disappeared and was replaced by an inexplicable solemnity. Behind this passage, there might be another space-time layer, or it might be directly the two holy wills. The result would soon be revealed. Whether the holy wills were purely holy wills, or whether the divine Lord and his disciple had done something to them, the answer would soon be revealed. Under such circumstances, how could Luo Fan not be solemn? Taking a deep breath, Luo Fan said faintly, "Let me see the result. My body must be controlled by me." With that, he lifted his foot and took a light step forward. His figure quickly shrank, and in a trance he had already shrunk to a size that was hundreds of millions of times smaller than the ant, reaching the level where he could freely enter and exit the passage. Chapter 1353. Now that he had shrunk to such an extent, when he stepped into the passageway, the tiny passageway was no different from a normal passageway to him. However, when Luo Fan entered it, he didn't feel as relaxed as when he passed through the 1,296 space-time layers. Instead, it was extremely difficult. It was so difficult that he felt as if he had become a mortal pushing a mountain forward. Every step he took seemed to be exhausting his own strength to move forward a little bit. Under this kind of movement, the passageway, which was not considered long, seemed to have become infinitely long. It felt like it would take billions of years to pass through it. As for the difficulty of passing through this passageway, Luo Fan had already expected it. After all, he could only reach the 1,296 space-time layers. In other words, this was his limit. Under such circumstances, if he wanted to go deeper and explore the next layer, it would be equivalent to breaking through his own limits and breaking through the shackles that limited him. How could it be easy? How could it be easy? However, even though he had expected it to be difficult, he did not expect it to be so difficult. It was so difficult that he could only take a few years to take a step forward. Moreover, this step felt like he was walking on the same spot. If it was not for his amazing observation skills, he would not have noticed that he was moving forward with this step. However, in the space-time inside his body, Luo Fan had unlimited time. Billions of years were only a second compared to the outside world. Moreover, Luo Fan's will was strong enough, and his Taoist heart was perfect enough. Even though it was so difficult, he did not have the slightest thought of giving up. Even if he could only take a step forward after a few years, and this step felt so insignificant that one would not be able to notice it unless one's perception was sharp to a certain extent, it was still progress, wasn't it? As long as he could continue like this, one day he would be able to break through this passageway and truly step into a deeper space-time layer. With this belief in mind, Luo Fan moved forward in this passageway bit by bit. Behind him, as soon as he turned his head, he could see the vast and boundless world before he entered the passageway. In front of him, it was pitch black. He couldn't see how long the passageway was, nor could he see how many more steps he had to take before he could pass through it. Luo Fan didn't care about this kind of journey that would make an ordinary person despair. He walked forward step by step without a care in the world. Time continued to pass as he advanced without any hope. 1 year, 2 years, 10 years, 100 years, 1,000 years, 10,000 years, 100,000 years, 1,000,000 years, 10,000,000 years. Before he knew it, 300 billion years had passed. And after 300 billion years, the path that Luo Fan took in the tunnel, but it was quite limited, although they had already entered deep into the passageway. But as soon as he looked back, however, he could still see the light that belonged to that space-time at the entrance of the tunnel. The path in front of him was still as serene and pitch black as before. He couldn't see where the exit was at all, let alone how long it would take for him to pass through this passageway. After experiencing hundreds of eras in the future universe, Luo Fan's face still didn't change. He was still calm, and quiet. He walked forward step by step as if he was just taking a stroll. A level 3 pseudo-sage existence should have such a will. Those who really wanted to obtain the primordial chaos Tao fruit should have such a will. He walked forward step by step. Time continued to pass in this process. It could even be said that the passage of time seemed to have gradually changed during this process. Even the fixed minutes and seconds seemed to have become illusory. Only Luo Fan's footsteps, which were moving at a fixed frequency, were real and stable. Another 300 billion years passed. At a certain moment, Luo Fan took a step forward and suddenly felt that there was nothing in front of him. All the resistance suddenly disappeared out of thin air, and a feeling that was different from the previous 600 billion years in the passageway arose spontaneously. When this feeling came, Luo Fan's heart shook. This was the first time that his mind, which had been completely stable for more than 600 billion years, was shaken. Did I pass? He cast his gaze around and finally found that the darkness around him was inexplicably different from the darkness in the passageway. Faintly, there was a sense of space-time coming from the darkness. This was completely the feeling of entering another space-time layer. After understanding this, Luo Fan couldn't help but heave a sigh of relief. Although he was able to firmly ensure that his mind was stable during those 600 billion years and could persevere and move forward step by step, it would be an exaggeration to say that this kind of almost endless walking had no effect on his mood. In fact, although he was able to convince himself to keep moving forward during this period of time, Luo Fan himself was also under more and more pressure. After this change, he felt that his will and his mind seemed to be suffering from unimaginable pressure. As time went on, he faintly felt that he was about to collapse. Now that he had suddenly passed through that seemingly endless passage, he had finally arrived at his destination, the deeper layer of space-time. The kind of feeling, how relaxed, how wonderful it was could be imagined. At this moment, an indescribable feeling of transparency suddenly arose from his heart and underwent an indescribable cleansing of his mind. Along with this tempering, he suddenly felt that the fourth step below the sage level, which was originally so far ahead of him, seemed to have come under his feet unknowingly. He felt that as long as he took one more step forward, he would be able to step onto the fourth step in an instant and become a level 4 pseudo-sage. With this thought, Luo Fan also acted in this way. He took a step forward, and the fourth step took a step back. His position was still the same as before. The distance between him and the fourth step was still the same. Obviously, although he had arrived at the fourth step and seemed to be able to step onto it with just one more step, this only meant that he had reached the peak of a level 3 pseudo-sage. It did not mean that he was qualified to step onto the fourth step. He still had to continue to work hard if he wanted to really step onto the fourth step. I'm still lacking a little. Luo Fan sighed. With a shake of his body, he slowly grew in size. In the end, he grew from a state that was hundreds of millions of times smaller than an ant to the size of a normal person. He quietly floated in the void. The change in the size of the body had a great impact on one's vision. This was just like how the perspective of a normal person and the perspective of a microscope were completely different when his body truly returned to normal. He finally saw the deeper space-time layer clearly. In this entire space-time layer, there was no space-time or world. In the entire space-time layer, there was only nothingness. A nothingness that didn't exist at all. Just as Luo Fan really focused his vision on the entire space-time layer, the entire space-time layer began to gradually change. Strange space-times began to be born here and evolved here. The number of these space-times was 10 times less than the previous space-time layer. However, there were still millions of them. In these space-times, there were also countless of them. They seemed to be a part of Luo Fan's own living beings. These living beings existed here, living in those space-times, evolving all kinds of gratitude and grudges, as well as the various forms of the mortal world. They, compared to the living beings in the previous space-time layer, they contained more of Luo Fan's characteristics. It seemed that they were more similar to Luo Fan's previous life, but they touched him even more. Regarding these, Luo Fan's heart was indeed touched a lot. He felt that he seemed to be able to comprehend some inexplicable mysteries from them. However, at this moment, he did not have too much energy to focus on these space-times. All of his energy was focused on another matter, the divine will that the ultimate God and his disciple had poured into him. Where is it? Is it in this layer? Luo Fan thought to himself as his perception enveloped the entire space-time layer. He carefully sensed everything in this space-time layer and searched within it. However, it was a pity. The two holy wills still did not exist in this layer. The feeling brought by the two holy wills was still there, but just like the previous layer, it still enveloped everything and filled the entire space-time layer. It's still deeper. A bitter smile finally appeared on Luo Fan's face. It had taken him more than 600 billion years to pass through that layer of the space-time passage, and he still had to go deeper. How many more years would that take? Even for the outside world, that period of time might not even be a second. However, he himself had truly experienced such a long period of time. He still felt a little uncomfortable when he recalled that feeling. However, Luo Fan was Luo Fan after all. Even though he felt a little uncomfortable, he still dispelled all kinds of negative emotions. After failing to find it here, he quickly decided to continue deeper. 100 billion years, a trillion years, 10 trillion years. No matter how long it took, he must find the two holy wills. He had to go deep enough to find the two holy wills and find out what was hidden within. After making up his mind, he continued the previous process from the previous layer. He set up a deduction formation and infused the information of the 1,297 space-time layers into it. He began to perform deductions and calculations to search for the existence of this space-time layer and the passage to the next space-time layer. Even though he had already gone through one deduction, he still had to start from the beginning if he wanted to deduce the overall pattern again after the addition of the 1,297 space-time layers. This was because the 1,297 space-time layers were basically a complete whole, and the situation of each layer was related to all the other space-time layers. The pattern that he had previously deduced was no longer applicable now. The process was similar to the previous one. Luo Fan found the passage. The process of passing through the passage was also equivalent to breaking through the limit and breaking free of the shackles. Even though Luo Fan felt much clearer now, the difficulty of passing through was not much different from before. It was similarly incomparably difficult. This time, It took him more than 700 billion years to pass through the passage and enter the 1,298th layer of space-time. There, he saw a boundless void. The nothingness was like a layer of space-time. The moment his gaze landed on it, worlds and space-time began to form. The number of worlds in space-time was 10 times less than the previous layer, and there were only about 100,000 space-time layers left. As expected, the 1,298th space-time layer. There were also no two holy wills. The 1,296 space-time layer has 1 million space-time layers, and the deeper I go, it's 100,000 space-time layers. The next layer, could it be 10,000 space-time layers? If this continues, when I reach the 1,303rd layer, won't the space-time become one? As Luo Fan thought about this, he continued the previous process and began to deduce the passage. It was difficult to cross the passage again, and so on and so forth. The difficulty did not decrease in the slightest. Another 800 billion years later, he arrived at the 1,299th space-time layer. Here, the space-time that appeared was just as he had expected. There were only 10,000 space-time layers left, and it was just as he had expected. There were no signs of the two holy wills. Luo Fan, who was already familiar with the process, continued to go deeper. More than 900 billion years later, he arrived at the 1,300th space-time layer. There were no holy wills here, and the number of space-time layers was reduced to 1,000. After a trillion years, he arrived at the 1,301st layer. There were still no holy wills. The number of space-time layers. It was reduced to 100. Just like that, after waiting for 2 trillion years, Luo Fan finally arrived at the 1,303rd space-time layer. Here, the number of space-time layers that appeared was finally reduced to 1. This entire space-time layer, like a boundless continent, it occupied the main body of the entire space-time layer. And all the living creatures in this space-time seemed to be like the complete Luo Fan, just that their personalities were a little biased, slightly different from the real Luo Fan's personality. Luo Fan, they on this boundless continent played all kinds of roles, forming a complete civilization. Even though he had been paying attention to the holy wills, when Luo Fan arrived, he was shocked at the first moment. Looking at the countless versions of himself, playing all kinds of strange identities according to their slightly biased or slightly biased personalities, combining to form such a prosperous, complete, natural society and civilization without a trace of artificiality, it made Luo Fan feel like he was experiencing a completely different life. And that feeling, because these creatures were almost exactly the same as him, made Luo Fan feel a sense of immersion that he had never felt before. This made Luo Fan feel that if he was really in that kind of situation, he might really be able to survive in that way. If his personality really deviated a little bit in that direction, his fate would really be like that. Therefore, it was easy to imagine how shocked he was. At that moment, Luo Fan unknowingly completely forgot about the holy wills and completely forgot to search for the possible tricks that the Divine Lord and his disciple might have done in his body. Instead, he wholeheartedly integrated his soul into that space-time, into the countless creatures, using their bodies and souls to experience the lives of countless versions of himself. Because he was so immersed, he had unknowingly completely integrated into that space-time, except for the last trace of clarity in the depths of his heart, and began to play different versions of himself. Unknowingly, the concept of time, like the holy wills, was also completely forgotten by him. Just like that, trillions of years had passed unknowingly. Compared to the previous process of constantly going through the passage and constantly going deeper into the space-time layer, which took trillions of years this time, although Luo Fan had only experienced trillions of years, he felt that the time he experienced this time was countless times longer than the time he had experienced before. In that deep immersion, Luo Fan unknowingly saw through many things. The invisible shackles that originally shackled him, restricted him, and prevented him from improving were unknowingly broken. He did not even really make a breakthrough, but his cultivation realm had already broken through the shackles of a level 3 pseudo-saint. When he came back to his senses, he felt that he was already standing on the fourth step below the sage realm, and what he could see from afar was already the fifth step. In other words, he had unknowingly become a level 4 pseudo-saint. Flowers planted deliberately don't bloom, but willows planted unintentionally grow unknowingly. Luo Fan could not help but reveal a faint smile as he felt his cultivation realm break through. He suddenly had an inexplicable feeling in his heart. After coming back to his senses, Luo Fan recalled the entire process of his breakthrough and roughly understood why he was able to achieve a breakthrough. Through the long years of experience, he had already understood that the number of space-time layers in a creature's body was closely related to the creature's life essence. In other words, it was closely related to the creature's cultivation realm. At a certain level of cultivation realm, it generally represented the number of space-time layers in a creature's body. In order to discover the existence of the holy decree, Luo Fan had forcefully dug out several deeper layers of space-time layers in his body despite the impossibility. This had actually allowed him to break through the shackles that had shackled his life essence. It was equivalent to letting him come into contact with the mysteries of the next level of cultivation realm in advance that belonged to him. Under such circumstances, the breakthrough of his cultivation realm was actually a matter of course. Even if nothing special happened, he would naturally have a breakthrough after cultivating for a period of time. Chapter 1354. The moment Luo Fan broke through to become a level 4 pseudo-sage, he felt that the changes in himself were huge. However, there was also another thing that had undergone a huge change. That was at this very moment, the number of space-times in the layer of space-time he was in had suddenly increased by more than 1,000,000 times. In the blink of an eye, the original space-time turned into millions of space-times arranged in this space-time layer. They were densely packed and covered the sky, making Luo Fan feel as if he had returned to the 1296 space-time layer. After Luo Fan experienced the changes after his cultivation realm breakthrough, he then noticed the changes that were happening in the space-time layer in front of him. At the same time, an inexplicable realization surged in his heart. There was also an indescribable helplessness. At this moment, he had also discovered that the two holy wills still did not exist in this layer of space-time. The feeling of the holy decree still enveloped the space-time layer, allowing everything in the space-time layer to sense the feeling brought by the holy decree. However, this feeling was exactly the same as the previous few floors. It didn't feel like the holy will was on this floor. Not to mention finding the two holy wills that existed in this layer of space-time. There's no end to this. Luo Fan felt helpless. In this situation, it was clear that he had to continue digging. However, he had just become a level 4 pseudo-sage, and his cultivation realm had only just stabilized. Under such circumstances, he could still try to dig deeper using the methods of the previous few levels and continue to explore the next level. However, the chances of success were not high. However, he still had to give it a try. After thinking about it, Luo Fan set up the prediction array in front of him. And this array, because his cultivation had broken through, it naturally evolved, becoming 10 times more complicated than before, more than 100 times more profound. The entire array formation floated in front of him, and it had already turned into a huge planet. Luo Fan raised his hand and clapped. Rays of spiritual light poured into the formation. As the light poured in, the entire array began to operate. It began to calculate the result that Luo Fan wanted. The process of this calculation was much faster than before. In just a short 1,000,000 years, he had already deduced a result. A small channel was directly fed into Luo Fan's heart. He found that channel. Luo Fan naturally did not hesitate. He took a step forward and arrived in a space-time, arriving at the location of the passageway. Seeing this channel, Luo Fan could not help but frown. This channel was smaller than he had imagined, and it was hundreds of times smaller than the channels he had encountered before. Even though he was just standing here, he could feel the strong repulsive force coming from the channel. It was as if Luo Fan would be repulsed by the channel, even if he got close to it. After Luo Fan broke through his cultivation realm, this space-time layer was already very different from before. Not only did the number of space-time increase by 1,000,000 times, there was also the living creatures in this space-time. Although they were still not much different from before, because of Luo Fan's great progress, the difference between these living creatures and Luo Fan had become bigger and bigger. It felt like there was not much difference between them and the living creatures he had seen on the 1296th floor. For the current him, the effect of tempering his spirit had become rather ordinary. At least, there was no longer the shock that made him ignore everything else, nor could he easily sense the various forms of the mortal world. It was also because of this that in the process of waiting for the result of the formation for 1,000,000 years, Luo Fan did not immerse himself in the many living creatures to experience the various lives that were different from his own. Because of this, he did not have much nostalgia for this layer of space-time layer. With a thought, Luo Fan's figure rapidly shrunk. In the blink of an eye, he had shrunk by billions of times, directly shrinking to the same size as the passageway. After shrinking to this size, the world in his eyes had undergone an earth-shattering change. It was originally a void, but it seemed like there were endless planets floating in it, densely spreading into the endless distance. With a glance, Luo Fan knew which were water molecules. This passageway was in the depths of the space-time ocean, and there was naturally endless seawater around it. As Luo Fan shrunk to this size, the water molecules naturally became infinitely huge in his eyes and naturally looked like huge planets. Glancing at the completely different appearance of the ocean, Luo Fan did not waste any more time and stepped into the passageway. Before entering the passageway, he had already felt the existence of an extremely strong repulsive force. However, the repulsive force was still not too strong. With some effort, he still spent a few months walking into the passageway. However, as soon as he stepped into the passageway, the repulsive force suddenly increased by trillions of times. Not only did it make it take him decades to take each step, but it also caused him to take a step back. Moreover, not only was he unable to advance the distance he took, but he would also be pushed back by the repulsive force. This caused him to muster up his strength again and continue to step into the passageway. Then, he would repeat the process of stepping forward, being repulsed, stepping forward again, being repulsed again. In the end, there was no way for him to really walk into the passageway. After spending thousands of years experimenting, Luo Fan could only sigh helplessly. He admitted that it was impossible for him to really step into the passageway and walk to a deeper layer of space-time. Although there are some gains, it's difficult to achieve the most important goal. Luo Fan sighed, and a faint sense of helplessness appeared on his face. With a thought, he did not delay any longer. His perception incarnation suddenly collapsed, and he instantly withdrew. The process of entering this layer of space-time was extremely difficult and painful, and it even took him trillions of years to do so. However, just like opening a path, the first time opening a path was naturally extremely difficult, but after opening the path, naturally, it was extremely easy to pass through. In the blink of an eye, Luo Fan's perception broke through the layers of space-time and returned to his mind. His attention also returned to his macroscopic body. After returning to his body, he suddenly felt an inexplicable sense of discomfort. It was as if his body had become a little weak. It was somewhat unfamiliar. With a thought, he knew that this was because his perception had stayed in the space-time within his body for too long, and the difference between the time that his body actually stayed in was too great, resulting in a kind of incompatibility. After understanding this, Luo Fan was relieved. This kind of incompatibility was nothing to him at all. As long as he meditated and cultivated, he would be able to recover. Moreover, his cultivation realm had improved, but he needed to completely integrate all of his past cultivation achievements with himself. Only then would he be able to be in a flawless and unobstructed state. This also required him to cultivate again. He was slightly moved. After a slight calculation, Luo Fan knew that although he had stayed in the space-time within his body for trillions of years, Only a few breaths of time had passed in the outside world. It's a pity that this method doesn't have much of an effect on the cultivation of the body. Otherwise, I wouldn't need to distort time to obtain more time for cultivation. Luo Fan sighed and began to slowly circulate his mana to conduct a deeper refinement of his body. This allowed his body to gradually move closer to his cultivation realm, allowing his state to be closer to a flawless and unobstructed state. This process did not take up too much of his time. In just a short 100 years, he had already completed this cultivation process. His entire body had returned to its original flawless and unobstructed state. His body emitted an indescribable, strange aura, and he once again possessed the kind of soul that belonged to Luo Fan that would naturally be born in the depths of anyone's soul after seeing him. The characteristics of a level 4 pseudo-sage imprint. Luo Fan tried to restrain everything about himself, but in the end, there was still a trace of this characteristic that he could not restrain. However, this cannot be helped. After all, he had just become a level 4 pseudo-sage, and his mastery of this realm had not reached the acme of perfection. However, he could not completely restrain everything about himself. After his body had completely recovered to its peak, although Luo Fan was still a little dissatisfied with the fact that he could not completely restrain everything about himself, he did not bother about it anymore. He did not use the rune structure that he had constructed back then, which could not be strengthened as the spirit kingdom grew stronger, to attach it to his body to restrict the release of this characteristic. The reason was very simple. The spirit kingdom had long been destroyed by the test of the sage. Now, the power of the rune structure had long been weakened to the point that even the pseudo-sage characteristic could not completely isolate it. Moreover, now that Luo Fan was a level 4 pseudo-sage, the rune structure was even more powerless to suppress him. In the end, I still couldn't find the 2 holy wills. Luo Fan recalled his behavior 100 years ago, and an inexplicable bitter smile appeared on his face. Originally, the 2 holy wills might not necessarily be problematic, and they might not have been tampered with by the Divine Lord and his disciple. However, after spending trillions of years trying to find the 2 holy wills to no avail, Luo Fan could no longer treat the 2 holy wills as normal no matter what. To him, not digging them out was like a hard thorn in his heart, and he always felt uncomfortable. However, for him now, it was simply impossible to really find the 2 holy wills. If the space-time layer could increase as one's cultivation level increased, it was obvious that the Divine Lord and his disciple had placed the 2 holy wills in the deepest space-time layer they could reach. In other words, it was the deepest space-time layer that only a level 9 pseudo-saint could reach. Under such circumstances, even after breakthrough, Luo Fan was only a level 4 pseudo-sage. In the face of the space-time layer that only a level 9 pseudo-sage could reach, of course, there was nothing he could do, and it would be difficult to find them. With a bitter smile, Luo Fan forced himself to dispel all kinds of negative emotions. For such an unchangeable fact, it would be useless to waste more time thinking about it, and it would not solve the real problem at all. Moreover, he did not forget that what he wanted to find were the 2 holy wills. Even if the 2 holy wills were tampered with by the Divine Lord and his disciple, he might not have any way to get rid of them. In that case, whether he could find the 2 holy wills or not, to him, there would be almost no difference. This fact should have been very easy to think of. It was just that Luo Fan had been focused on searching for the 2 holy wills, and had inadvertently overlooked this fact. Currently, there was no way to find the 2 holy wills. He had brought up this fact just now to comfort himself, as well as to encourage himself. The holy will. Luo Fan sighed. He took a step forward and stepped out of the world he had created. He directly appeared on the huge island with a circumference of 100 miles. Compared to the past, there wasn't much of a difference here. It looked exactly the same. It was still boundless and full of vitality. The moment Luo Fan appeared, he suddenly sensed a strange aura coming from somewhere on the island. This aura was not strong. In fact, it could only be considered weak. But it was such an aura that attracted Luo Fan's attention at this time. This was because the owner of this aura had instantly condensed a level 4 pseudo-sage brand that belonged to Luo Fan in the depths of his soul. This speed of condensation was almost a blow to Luo Fan, who had been trying his best to restrain his flawless and unhindered characteristics. He had expected this to happen. Even if there was a creature that could condense a level 4 pseudo-sage brand in the depths of its soul after seeing him, it would take at least a few years and hundreds or even thousands of years before it could truly take shape. However, he had only just appeared and floated in the air. The creature might have only glanced at him, but it had already condensed a level 4 pseudo-sage brand in the depths of his soul. How could he not be bothered? With a thought, Luo Fan made a grabbing motion with his hand. An invisible big hand directly stretched out and grabbed downwards, grabbing the void within a radius of several hundred feet for where the creature was located. With a slight pull, the spherical void of 100 feet had already floated in front of Luo Fan. And within it, a creature the size of a basketball that looked like a tortoise was struggling in horror. The space that Luo Fan had grabbed was naturally imbued with his own power. Even a level 4 pseudo-sage wouldn't be able to break free, let alone this tortoise that seemed to only be slightly stronger than ordinary creatures and couldn't even compare to an itinerant immortal cultivator. Naturally, no matter how it struggled, the space remained motionless and didn't suffer any damage. "That's you?" Luo Fan looked at the tortoise, and his eyes flickered faintly. He began to analyze the nature of the tortoise. Now that Luo Fan could easily create a half-step pseudo-sage cultivator, it was naturally not difficult for him to analyze such a weak creature. In an instant, an endless amount of information about the tortoise's structure flowed through his eyes and into his mind, allowing him to gain an extremely deep understanding of the tortoise in just a short while. This tortoise was actually a descendant of the black tortoise. In its head, there was an extremely deep memory that seemed to come from its bloodline. This memory was not an invisible existence, but condensed into a kind of existence similar to cultivation wisdom, entrenched in the depths of the tortoise's head. Perhaps even the tortoise itself didn't know about the existence of this cultivation wisdom. However, its magical use had reached an unimaginable level. He was constantly pouring all kinds of cultivation experiences into the turtle's mind, so that even in its sleep, the turtle's cultivation could naturally increase, and its cultivation realm would naturally improve. Just now, it was also because of the existence of this martial wisdom that the tortoise could so easily receive the trace of the flawless state that Luo Fan didn't completely conceal when it saw Luo Fan, and it quickly condensed the rank 4 pseudo-sage imprint in the depths of its soul. The tortoise struggled for a long time, and after realizing that it couldn't break free at all, it looked at Luo Fan with incomparable fear. Its limbs, head, and tail shrunk back into its shell, and only the light from its eyes shone out from the depths of the shell. Seeing this, Luo Fan couldn't help but laugh. With his status, would he still attack this weak tortoise? He sighed and said, "I don't know if your luck is good or bad, but you actually obtained my imprint." After sighing, he was about to throw the tortoise out, but at this moment, the tortoise suddenly spoke, say, "Junior, spare me." Its voice was extremely young, and it sounded like a 3-year-old child. Moreover, its tone was extremely choppy, as if it was speaking for the first time. This is convenient. If it wants to speak, it will naturally reveal the knowledge of the language, fuse it into its memory, and instantly master a language. Luo Fan took one look and knew what was going on. This tortoise couldn't have been born for more than 10 years, which was why its speech was so choppy. In fact, he even suspected that this might be the first time the tortoise had spoken since it was born. At this moment, he became interested in the tortoise and stopped thinking about throwing it out. Chapter 1355. Luo Fan knew very well that it would be impossible for him to get the answer he wanted from the tortoise's mouth. There was only one way he could do it, and that was to directly read the cultivation wisdom. He could directly search for its secrets in the depths of its bloodline. Therefore, his expression did not change in the face of the tortoise's begging. He only smiled and made a grabbing motion. In an instant, An invisible object was pulled out from the tortoise's head. This grab brought indescribable pain to the tortoise. At this moment, it felt as if a vital part of its life had been grabbed out of its body. It let out a mournful scream. At this time, it couldn't care less about shrinking its head. It stretched out its limbs and constantly waved them. The power in its body crazily erupted, and some of it even belonged to Luo Fan's magical ability. This was clearly Feng Ci. In such a short period of time, its cultivation wisdom had already analyzed a little of the level 4 pseudo-sage imprint that it had obtained from Luo Fan and obtained a little of Luo Fan's magic. However, it was a pity that although the cultivation wisdom was mysterious, the tortoise's cultivation base was too weak. Even with those unfathomable divine abilities and some of Luo Fan's means, they couldn't resist Luo Fan at all. It was so much so that they couldn't even shake the clump of space that Luo Fan had created. Luo Fan didn't pay any attention to this turtle. Since it had obtained benefits from him, it was only natural for it to pay a little price. This lump of cultivation wisdom was formless and intangible. It could even be considered an abstract existence. However, in Luo Fan's eyes, this existence was so clear, so real, and so clear. He saw a strange creature with a dragon's head, a ghost body, and a snake's tail. He saw a strange creature with a dragon's head, a ghost body, and a snake's tail. Luo Fan was very familiar with this creature. It was the legendary black tortoise. This creature looked very lifelike, as if a real black tortoise had been compressed in front of him. In fact, there was an indescribable sense of nobility in its eyes. It was as if the gods above the 9 heavens were overlooking everything in the world under his control. It seems like this is a descendant of the black tortoise. Luo Fan suddenly understood. He inserted his will into the cultivation wisdom, and in an instant he felt endless information flowing through his mind. This information contained endless mysteries of the great Tao. However, these mysteries did not only belong to the great Tao of the demon world. In fact, it wasn't just the profound mysteries of the great Tao that belonged to Earth and the universe. Within it, there was a great Tao profundity that did not belong to any perfect world that Luo Fan was familiar with. How is that possible? Luo Fan turned pale with fright. In his memory, he had some understanding of the mysteries of the great Tao of the demon world, the Earth universe, the primordial world, and the heaven origin world. This was the profound mysteries of the great Tao of the Ninely world. Because he had once encountered a cultivator from that world, he had a rough image of it. Under such circumstances, the cultivation wisdom in front of him actually contained the mysteries of the great Tao that did not belong to those worlds. It was obvious what this meant. This is an outsider. The Earth universe. They're actually outsiders. How is this possible? Luo Fan suddenly felt an indescribable shock in his heart. This time, he looked at the tortoise because he was a little curious. He was just a little interested in the tortoise's performance, but he did not expect that by casually grabbing it, he would actually learn such a huge secret. There were actually outsiders from other perfect worlds or even other great worlds in this originally sealed universe of Earth. Furthermore, these outsiders even left behind many descendants, and in the end, they actually ended up on this completely uninhabited island. How inconceivable was this? What secret is behind this? What do these outsiders have to do with the collapse of the Earth universe? Luo Fan's mind was in a mess. Many thoughts kept emerging and fading away. Because of the turmoil in his mind, a chaotic aura gradually appeared on his body. This kind of fluctuation instantly wiped out the entire island within a radius of 100 miles. It made the island that originally existed in this sea region, full of vitality, completely disappear without a trace, as if it had never existed. The countless creatures that originally lived on it were completely destroyed at that moment. Everything disappeared without a trace. This kind of abnormality was quickly discovered by Luo Fan. He instantly controlled his own aura and slowly withdrew it. However, the island that had disappeared did not come back to life. I didn't expect that I still can't completely control my mind. It seems that the previous aftereffects are quite big. Luo Fan could not help but sigh. He did not feel too much pity for the disappearance of the island. After all, it was just an island. For Luo Fan, who could easily destroy the endless world with a wave of his hand, no matter how much he restrained himself, he could not take the island too seriously. Moreover, there were no creatures on the island that he considered to be like him. Luo Fan did not care about the loss of the island, but it did not mean that no one cared. At least, the tortoise in front of Luo Fan, who was sealed up by the space he grabbed, was very concerned about this. In its eyes, what happened just now was really like a nightmare. His home, which he had lived in since he was born, and which he even now felt to be extremely large, had been completely wiped out by this monster with just a slight fluctuation of his aura. This kind of terrifying power in his eyes was simply a naked warning. At this point, it did not dare to struggle anymore. Even though its body was in boundless pain, it only dared to tremble there. Every part of its body was submissive. Sorry, it was a moment of carelessness. Luo Fan smiled and said. This was the first thing he said since he saw the tortoise. This sentence was like a spring breeze that contained boundless power, completely dispelling all the uneasiness in the tortoise's heart and all the pain in its body. As he stood there, his expression became relaxed and calm. After Luo Fan said this, he continued to comprehend the cultivation wisdom. After saying this, he continued to comprehend the cultivation wisdom. The cultivation wisdom contained the mysteries of the great Tao. It was even more profound than Luo Fan's current cultivation realm. Although it was not to the extent that he could not understand it all, he felt that there were many things that he could not understand. This kind of appearance was clearly the source of the inheritance of the wisdom of cultivation. His cultivation level was even higher than his, but it wasn't that high. It was only 1 or 2 realms higher than him. In other words, the source of the cultivation wisdom was the inheritance. Its cultivation realm was roughly equivalent to a 5th-tier or 6th-tier pseudo-saint. Of course, this was only equivalent. The division of realms in the wisdom of cultivation was not like this. Instead, there were different systems and different paths. However, that was the division with the demon realm. There was no essential difference, but it was needless to say. Perhaps I can peek into some other things from the cultivation wisdom and obtain some other revelations. With that thought, Luo Fan took the tortoise and flew in a direction. This time, he found an island that was tens of thousands of times larger than the island that the Ling Kingdom was on. This island was also quite chaotic, and it was also filled with countries. However, there was no unified country that controlled everything. On this huge island, there were also many uninhabited places with many cultivators. Luo Fan scanned the entire island with his perception and knew that the strongest person on the island was only a 2nd-tier pseudo-saint. Moreover, this 2nd-tier pseudo-saint did not control any major forces on the island. He was just a rogue cultivator like himself. Faced with this, Luo Fan simply sent a thought over and expressed that he wanted to cultivate on the island for a period of time. He then chose an ordinary country, transformed into an ordinary person, and descended. Cultivation required a balance between work and rest. He had experienced trillions of years in his body. Although it was only a few breaths of time in the outside world, it had a considerable impact on his mind. He had already sensed this before. Under such circumstances, he naturally needed some leisurely time to adjust his mind. Facing a thought that was obviously a 4th-tier pseudo-saint, it was almost certain what the 2nd-tier pseudo-saint on the island would choose. Unless he was crazy, how would he dare to say no? After the thought passed through, he quickly returned and expressed that he would let Luo Fan choose as he pleased. Even if Luo Fan wanted his cave abode, he would give it to him with both hands. This attitude made Luo Fan quite satisfied. Great Immortal, I wonder if you can let me go. When Luo Fan turned into an ordinary person, the tortoise realized that something was wrong and said desperately, "Don't you want your things?" Luo Fan gestured to the tortoise with the cultivation wisdom. Although the tortoise couldn't see the true appearance of the cultivation wisdom and couldn't understand what it was, after all, an existence that was grabbed from his head. He instinctively knew how important that thing was to him. Hearing Luo Fan's words, he couldn't help but hesitate. Don't worry, I don't intend to do anything to you. During the time I stay here, you can be my pet. Luo Fan smiled faintly. Cultivation was prevalent in the Devil Realm, and there were all kinds of strange creatures. Although it was a little strange to have a tortoise as a pet, it was not unique. Even if Luo Fan pretended to be an ordinary person and had such a tortoise as a pet, it would not be considered special. The current Luo Fan, to say that his words were the law would be an underestimation of him. With just a thought, everything around him, including the souls and memories of living creatures, would naturally change according to his thoughts. He had transformed into an ordinary person, but he existed as an innkeeper. As for the innkeeper, he did not exist even a few breaths ago. However, the moment he became the innkeeper, in almost everyone's memory, they would only find that this inn had been here for a long time, and the innkeeper had also existed for a long time. Some of the old people even had the memories of the innkeeper when he was a child, as well as the memories of the innkeeper's parents and grandparents. All these things did not even require Luo Fan to specially modify their memories. He only needed to have the thought of transforming into the innkeeper. All these memories would naturally be derived and naturally integrated into human society. For example, at this moment, an old man nearby said, "Oh, isn't this Xiao Luo? Why are you so diligent today? You actually came to your shop. If I remember correctly, didn't you only appear once every half a month?" "Oh, it's old Lu. I see. But I had a dream last night, so I decided to work hard from today onwards. I will be living in this inn." Luo Fan naturally knew the old man's identity with a glance. He laughed. Since he was going to integrate into the lives of ordinary people, he naturally could not hold on to his identity. It's good to work hard. Hey, your pet tortoise has grown so big. The last time I saw it, it was the size of a fist. Old Lu said with a smile. Oh, this guy's days have suddenly grown crazily these days. I don't know if it ate something strange. It's really worrying. Luo Fan glanced at the tortoise that was looking around and said with a smile. At this time, the tortoise already had a look of horror on its face, and its heart was full of doubts. Listening to the conversation between the two of them, and looking at the familiar gazes of the passers-by around it, it suddenly had an illusion that it had long been this person's pet. Moreover, it had been living here for a long time. The memory of the previous 10 years on that deserted island was just an illusion of its own. After chatting with old Lu for a while, Luo Fan entered the shop. Even memories could be naturally modified, so the situation in the shop was naturally very obvious. Not only were there employees, the innkeeper also had many customers there. Everything was everything. It was as if this inn really had a rather long history. No one knew how long it had been here, and had been operating for many days. Such a change was naturally nothing to Luo Fan. But the tortoise that had not even achieved the immortal path was too busy looking at it. The illusion that it had before became even more obvious, and it gradually began to believe itself. Luo Fan was the owner of the inn, so naturally, there were people who hurriedly came to greet him. After some encouragement, the inn returned to normal. Luo Fan directly picked a seat by the window and sat down. He drank a little wine, holding the invisible cultivation wisdom in his hand, and quietly felt the atmosphere of the mortal world around him. It was now close to noon, and the number of customers gradually increased. The situation in the entire inn was rather bustling. All sorts of shouts, discussions, and whispers could be heard everywhere, and it formed a joyous and harmonious scene. How long has it been since I really saw this? Luo Fan could not help but think. Thinking about it carefully, he had always seemed to be rapidly advancing, as if he was being chased by something. Even if he had the opportunity to experience the mortal world in the past, it was mostly for the sake of cultivation. In his memory, he could not even find a real, aimless enjoyment of this kind of atmosphere. Thinking about it, he shook his head and smiled bitterly. My heart, as expected, has been greatly shaken. I can't believe I'm feeling sentimental about this now. But this feeling, it seems quite good. He smiled and took a sip of what he felt was extremely low-quality wine. He let out a long breath, feeling an indescribable sense of relaxation spread throughout his body. As the owner of the inn, what he was currently drinking was naturally the best and most expensive wine in the inn. However, no matter how good and expensive the wine was, for an existence at Luo Fan's level of cultivation, it was still extremely inferior. What is this? The pet tortoise seemed to be not used to drinking the low-quality wine that Luo Fan placed in front of him, and mumbled, "What is this?" This mumbling was naturally not loud enough for others to hear. But for Luo Fan, it was quite obvious. Luo Fan only smiled and said, "This is wine, a beverage that ordinary living beings greatly hope to drink. Perhaps you will also like it in the future." "So this is wine. It tastes strange." The tortoise took another sip and mumbled, "But unexpectedly, it's not bad." As a tortoise that was born on an uninhabited island and had lived for less than 10 years, something like wine was, of course, extremely unfamiliar to it. Seeing this tortoise that was so unfamiliar with wine, Luo Fan suddenly became interested. He wanted to see what kind of attitude it had towards other common foods in the mortal world. Therefore, he directly called for the waiter and had them bring a set of all kinds of meat and vegetables in the inn. The tortoise looked at Luo Fan's actions in confusion. After a while, when the waiter finally brought the wine and dishes over, it couldn't help but widen its eyes with great curiosity. "These are for me." It couldn't help but be shocked as it looked at the wine and dishes that were continuously placed in front of it. "Isn't it normal to provide food for pets?" Luo Fan only smiled and said, "Thank you, master." The tortoise actually immediately changed the way it addressed him from calling him Great Immortal Luo Fan to calling him master. It was obvious that it had conquered Luo Fan's low-quality, ordinary wine and dishes. Hearing the tortoise call him master so smoothly, Luo Fan couldn't help but laugh. However, he didn't care. Although he didn't like this little tortoise, it had obtained his level for Pseudo-Sage brand and was even his pet, so it wasn't wrong to call it that. Chapter 1356. The city that Luo Fan was currently hiding in was called Gold Border City. This city belonged to a country on this island called the Great Light Nation. Although it was not the capital of this country, it was still an economically developed city. The entire city had a population of more than 10 million. With such a large population, one could imagine how big a city was needed, especially in a society that was similar to ancient China. However, recently, the residents of Gold Border City had been spreading rumors that something strange had happened in this city. In an inn in the east of the city, a turtle that could eat a lot had appeared. The extent of this turtle's appetite was shocking to anyone. The amount of food it could eat in a day might not even be enough for hundreds of people. It was said that because of this turtle's existence, the inn, which was originally doing very well and had a lot of income, was now unable to make ends meet. Almost all of the income was going into the turtle's mouth. Because of this rumor, the residents of Gold Border City tried their best to go to that, and even if they had nothing to do. They wanted to see what this turtle that could eat so much looked like. As a result, the inn's business improved a little. Because there were more people, the income also increased. On the contrary, the inn gradually changed its state of being unable to make ends meet. There seemed to be some surplus. "Boss Luo, this won't do. What's the use of such a pet? Even if you have a mountain of gold and silver, you can't withstand such a loss. It can eat the food of hundreds of people in a day. Isn't that the same as having hundreds of soldiers under your command? It's too much to rely on such an inn," an experienced person said to the boss. As for the boss, in response to such words, he only smiled and nodded, thanking the person for the reminder. Then, he did what he had to do. Regarding this, some people found it interesting, some felt bitter, and some took pleasure in his misfortune. However, it vividly displayed the various aspects of human nature. This inn was naturally the inn where Luo Fan's incarnation was hiding. And that boss Luo was obviously Luo Fan. That pet was clearly the one that Luo Fan had captured from that uninhabited island, and it was very likely that it was a descendant of the Outerverse. On this day, old Lu, who had spoken to him before, said to Luo Fan, "Luo, you'd better think of something. You pet. It must be some kind of exotic beast. Ordinary people like us can't afford to raise it. It is still young and obedient, but when it grows up, how will it be willing to submit to a mortal like you? At that time, there would be a backlash. Then it would be too late for regrets. Haha, old Lou, you worry for nothing. I've watched this pet of mine grow up. To it, I'm like a parent. No matter how big it grew, no matter how strong it was, it will only be good for me, and there won't be any harm. Luo Fan naturally smiled. Aya, little Luo, why don't you listen to me? When old Lu saw this, he was really distressed. Your way of thinking is really bad. Those who are not of the same race will have different intentions. Even between different races, it is impossible to work together, let alone between an exotic beast and a human. Don't be fooled by how dependent it is on you now. When it grows up in the future and realizes that its nature is different from us, its mentality will definitely not remain the same. A backlash was inevitable. Your wishful thinking will cause your own death in the future. However, Luo Fan displayed the appearance of a stubborn youth. He only shook his head with a smile and insisted that it would not happen, telling old Lu to relax. When old Lu saw this, he sighed helplessly and looked at Luo Fan as if he was looking at a dead man. Then, he turned around and left with a sigh. This old man is really interesting. The turtle had been chewing wantonly and did not care about anything else. Now that the old man had left, it curled its lips and said this. At this time, it had been more than a month since Luo Fan opened his shop in Jincheng. After getting along with Luo Fan for more than a month, the tortoise had a general understanding of Luo Fan. It was no longer trembling with fear, as if it was ready to be crushed into pieces and turned into powder at any time. Although it was still a little afraid, at least it could get along with Luo Fan normally. It's really interesting. Luo Fan smiled and raised his hand to flip a page of the book in his hand. This book looked like an ordinary book bought and sold in the mortal world. It looked like it could be bought on the streets and alleys. However, if anyone obtained this book, it would be a great blessing for them. From then on, it would only be a matter of time for them to step into the false sage level, or even become a level 4 or 5 false sage. That's right, this book was actually the thing that Luo Fan had extracted from the crow's skull. It was the object that had been transformed from the cultivation wisdom. Luo Fan lived in seclusion here. In addition to relaxing his mind, relaxing his body, and feeling the ordinary life, there was another reason, which was to study the wisdom of cultivation left behind by the outsiders who came from outside the Earth universe. For the current Luo Fan, the best way to study such wisdom was, of course, to completely copy it into his own memory, and then carefully study it in his own memory. That was naturally a relatively easy thing to do. Even if the wisdom was mysterious and unpredictable, he would only need a few days to completely copy it. After that, he would only need a few days to completely understand the mysteries of the level, for pseudo-sage level. Although the time required to comprehend the mysteries beyond the level, for pseudo-sage level was uncertain, it wouldn't take too long. However, now that Luo Fan came here with the intention of relaxing, he naturally would not choose to use this method to understand this cultivation wisdom. Instead, he directly transformed it into an ordinary book and used the method of reading books to decipher the cultivation wisdom bit by bit, turning the invisible cultivation wisdom into a tangible book. For an existence like him, it couldn't be any simpler. How's your cultivation going? Have you found my imprint? Luo Fan suddenly asked. He now enjoyed this mortal state very much. Originally, he could see the problem with just a sweep of his perception, but he would rather open his mouth and ask. I found it. The imprint of the great immortal is really mysterious. I can feel my own strength all the time. Speaking of this, the tortoise was overjoyed, even stopping its chewing action. As long as I cultivate for a period of time, I will definitely be able to break through the barrier between immortal and mortal and reach the immortal realm. At that time, I will be immortal and have an unlimited lifespan. The turtle said excitedly. Didn't you mention the transformation? Luo Fan said lightly. That transformation is secondary. The turtle seemed a little embarrassed. You don't need to transform. During the time you are my pet, you can maintain this form. Luo Fan just smiled and said so. His voice was very calm, but the turtle did not dare to respond to this sentence indifferently. Although he could barely get along with Luo Fan normally, it did not mean that he had forgotten how terrifying Luo Fan was. The scene of Luo Fan completely erasing an entire island with a wave of his aura was still appearing in his dreams this month. How could he dare to forget how terrifying Luo Fan was? For a monster that could transform, it had to maintain its original form. Of course, this was not a pleasing sight to the demons. But under the pressure of Luo Fan, the turtle obviously had no other choice and could only reluctantly agree. Luo Fan did not care about what the turtle was thinking. He only slowly flipped through the book in his hands, looking at the countless strange words that appeared on the surface. Countless strange characters, word by word. He read the many mysteries behind these characters. He continued to understand the cultivation civilization behind these mysteries, the perfect world, and even the great world. This was an extremely difficult thing to do, especially when Luo Fan was not using the most efficient method to understand at this moment. The difficulty increased exponentially. Although a month had passed, Luo Fan's harvest was not too much. He only had a general understanding of the cultivation method of the other cultivation civilization. You don't make any sense at all. With your status, you actually stole the inheritance of my descendant. Suddenly, such a sentence came out of the book. This sentence was somewhat childish and crisp, as if a child was speaking. You only cultivate wisdom. Don't learn from your master's tone. Luo Fan did not show any surprise at the appearance of this voice. He casually replied and flipped another page. This book looked like a book, but its essence was the wisdom of cultivation. Of course, the pages of the book couldn't be real pages. These pages actually represented a type of mystery that Luo Fan had divided into one category. With the endless mysteries contained within the cultivation wisdom, if the pages were to be flipped like this, who knew how many hundreds of millions of pages would be flipped? Thus, Luo Fan had already flipped through tens of thousands of pages in the past month, but it still looked like the pages he had just flipped through. Oh, why are you like this? I am talking to you about a very serious topic right now. The voice came out of the book again. Whether it was the voice of the tortoise or the voice of the book, they were both spoken in a way that exceeded the perception of ordinary people. Thus, whether it was the tortoise speaking or the book speaking, they did not attract the attention of anyone in the inn. Although everyone was paying attention to Luo Fan and the turtle from time to time, they didn't know what had happened here just now. In fact, they didn't even know that something unimaginable was happening right now. I don't think this question is not serious at all. Just like to all living beings, who I am is an eternal problem. To you, who you are is also an eternal problem. How can such a problem not be serious? Luo Fan did not pay attention to the voice at all. He continued to study the mysteries of the cultivation wisdom while speaking casually. The voice seemed to be stagnant for a moment. Then, it very naturally changed the topic and said, "What are you going to return me to the younger generation? You are so powerful. Why do you want this inheritance? Stones from other mountains can be used to improve jade. You have heard of this saying before, right?" Luo Fan said with a smile. This voice was actually a manifestation of the spirituality of the cultivation wisdom itself. Any existence that had reached the 5th or 6th level of the pseudo-sage level could not possibly be an ordinary dead object, even if it was just a part of the cultivation wisdom. It was the same. This spirituality was what Luo Fan had transformed the cultivation wisdom into this book. It naturally separated itself from the book and used the book as its body to form a spirituality. In fact, if this book was regarded as a magic treasure, this spirituality could be said to be the treasure spirit of this magic treasure. Refining the cultivation wisdom into a body was equivalent to refining it into a magic treasure, using its essence to upgrade it to the level of a magic treasure. It was really normal for spirituality to be born. After this spirituality appeared, it first scolded Luo Fan, just like before, saying that he did not have the temperament of an expert and actually disregarded his status to snatch the inheritance of his younger generation. After that, after Luo Fan ignored it. It started to chatter incessantly, whether it was despising, persuading, or tempting. It just wanted Luo Fan to return it to the turtle as soon as possible. At first, Luo Fan was a little interested in this spirituality and wanted to get some information about the other world from its mouth. But after a few attempts, finally, he found that this spirituality was simply a newly born spirituality. All of its memories were contained in this book, and he asked it to read this book with him. There was no difference at all. At this time, he no longer had any interest in this spirituality. As for what it said, he just casually brushed it off and did not care about it at all. The spirituality talked for a long time, but after getting only some answers that it had obtained in the previous days, it finally gave up. In the end, it turned its attention to the turtle. When it saw the turtle happily eating the food and drinking the wine that the waiter had just brought over, it finally could not help but shout angrily, "Get up! Do you still have the backbone of a cultivator? You're actually so willing to be bought over by such a small favor. Hurry up and cultivate. Knock this person down as soon as possible and overturn him. Get your freedom." The turtle snorted and said, "What are you talking about? I'm going to be immortal soon. Isn't that enough? What's the point of cultivation? Isn't it to be immortal? As long as you have an unlimited lifespan, you can enjoy anything. What's the point of cultivating so hard?" Shilmu, Shilmu, you're a dignified descendant of the black tortoise. How can you be so unambitious? Immortal? Do you think you could be immortal just by cultivating to the immortal realm? The spirituality was enraged. Isn't that so? The turtle didn't even raise its head. It sipped a mouthful of wine, its face showing an intoxicated expression. Obviously, it did not take the spirituality's words to heart. Nonsense. Without a strong power to protect you, a slightly stronger power is enough to crush you into powder. So what if you have an eternal lifespan? Aren't you still dead? Only by constantly cultivating, constantly improving your strength, and constantly improving your realm can you change this situation. The spirituality said angrily. That's a fallacy. The turtle said very seriously. The spirituality was amused. It sneered and said, "Then tell me, how is that fallacy? There's always someone better than you out there. Haven't you heard of this before?" The turtle's eyes were full of wisdom, as if it was a sage that had lived for countless years. It stared at the book in Luo Fan's hand and said so. Because of this, we have to work harder to cultivate. Only then can we be stronger than as many people as possible. The spirituality said, It seems that you only have a one-sided understanding of this sentence. There's always someone better than you out there. This is an argument that encompasses everyone and everything. It means that no matter how strong or terrifying you are, even if you're a sage, there's always someone stronger and more terrifying than you. No matter how big the sky is, even if you treat the entire chaos as a sky, there's always another chaos and another sky outside the chaos. And then, the spirituality was stunned. These words were clearly rather intelligent, elevating the phrase, "There's always someone better than you out there," to a height that made it feel astonished. Therefore, no matter how powerful and terrifying your cultivation is, even if you become a sage, you can't change the fate of being crushed into powder by a power stronger than you at any time. In this case, it's obvious that whether you cultivate or not, your fate won't change at all. If you're fated to die, then you'll definitely die. This fact won't change just because you're strong. If you're fated to not die, then no matter how weak you are, you won't die. Therefore, it's a fallacy for you to say that cultivating, increasing your strength, and increasing your realm can change this situation. This situation can't be changed. The turtle said. The spirituality was tongue-tied. It knew that these words were wrong, but for some reason, it couldn't find any reason to refute them. After a while, it thought of something and said, "You're wrong. As long as you become a sage, you'll be impervious to all tribulations and eternal. Any power, even if you're a sage, can only suppress and not kill. Therefore, as long as you become a sage, you can change this fate." Chapter 1357. Cultivation wisdom was momentarily unable to refute what it saw as an incomparably absurd fallacy. So, whether you cultivate or not has nothing to do with whether you can live long or not. You are destined to live as long as you can. If you focus on cultivation, you will live like this. If you keep messing around, your life will pass just like that. The turtle concluded. During the whole process of the turtle and the book arguing, Luo Fan could clearly hear every word they said, but he only had a faint smile on his face. The turtle's words made sense, and even the cultivation wisdom had nothing to say. However, in reality, it was only because it was affected by the level 4 mark. It couldn't control its own mind and couldn't firm up its view of the world. Naturally, it formed this specious argument. If the turtle was his disciple, he would naturally try to point out his mistake. However, it was obvious that the turtle was only his pet. To him, it was just a plaything. Why would he spend so much effort on it? Therefore, even as they argued, he was calmly flipping through the book in his hand, carefully savoring the mysteries of cultivation that were transmitted to him through various unimaginable methods from another perfect world or a greater world. He didn't care, but the cultivation wisdom didn't want to. Hey, you receive my master's cultivation wisdom. No matter what, this is karma. Aren't cultivators afraid of karma the most? No matter what, you have to repay something. My descendant is now stuck in a dead end. If you don't turn him around, the karma will only get worse. Its voice was sharp and clear. It was exasperated. Hearing this, Luo Fan couldn't help but pause. He finally said, "Karma? Your master has been dead for a long time. I'm afraid the karma has been broken." "Who said my master is dead? Plus, even if he is dead, since my master has a descendant, why can't he have other descendants? Can't this karma be transferred to the descendants?" The cultivation wisdom shouted. This cultivation wisdom was arguing with Luo Fan for the sake of the turtle. The tortoise didn't care at all. However, as it chewed on the mortal world's food, the cultivation wisdom grew increasingly irritated and anxious. Luo Fan thought about it and smiled. He said, "What you said makes some sense. Cultivation wisdom is very important to me, if you didn't return the favor. However, there is still a slight possibility that it could affect me. Fine, I'll just say a few words. Great Immortal, do you think I'm wrong?" The tortoise finally raised its head and looked at Luo Fan in disbelief. The conclusions he had obtained were clearly obtained from the brand he had obtained from the person in front of him. The mysteries contained in the mark clearly indicated the conclusion that he had comprehended. Why did this person in front of him say that he was wrong and actually wanted to change his view? In the face of this, Luo Fan naturally did not take it to heart. He faintly said, "Cultivation, there is indeed no limit. There is always someone better than you, and there is always someone better." This sentence is also true. His first sentence confirmed what the tortoise had said before. This made the tortoise even more puzzled. If this was true, then the conclusion that he had deduced should also be correct. Then what else did this person have to say? Luo Fan shook his head and said, "In any realm of cultivation, there must be experts who can easily crush them into powder. I can now say with certainty that this is the case even for sages." Luo Fan thought of the situation in the great Tianyuan world and the enlightenment he had obtained in a certain place that simulated the state of chaos. A disappointed look appeared on his face. Sages were indeed not truly the strongest. Even in the eyes of ordinary cultivators, or even all cultivators, sages were omniscient, omnipotent, eternal, indestructible, and indestructible. Even the destruction of a perfect world could not harm them at all. However, at the same time, there were existences more powerful than sages. They could crush sages with a single finger and completely erase their existence from the boundless space and time. This was because sages were indestructible, and indestructible. However, this was only limited to the state of chaos that Luo Fan currently understood. Outside of the state of chaos, or perhaps in a deeper or higher layer of chaos, there were other existences that were even vaster, grander, and more incredible. There, sages would also lose their incredible characteristics. After losing their characteristics, it was obviously not impossible for them to be crushed and turned into powder. Even in the state of chaos, there might be existences that could pose a threat to sages. This was something that Luo Fan had never doubted. This was what Luo Fan thought. It was also some of the ideas contained in the 4th-level pseudo-sage imprint that belonged to him. The reason why the turtle had these ideas was because it had received these ideas from the imprint. When the turtle heard Luo Fan's words, the doubt on its face became even more intense. However, this doesn't mean that cultivation is meaningless. On the contrary, it means that cultivation is of great significance, Luo Fan said. How is that possible? The turtle was shocked. How could the same argument be used to deduce a completely opposite conclusion? Naturally, Luo Fan would not answer such nonsense. He continued, although there is no end to cultivation, and it is impossible to suppress all living beings under one's feet. However, the stronger a living being is, the stronger its resistance to external variables will be. For example, mortals can't even resist time. After 100 years, or a few hundred years, they will become a pile of dust. Immortals, on the other hand, can resist time and let it pass. As long as no accidents happen, they will naturally live. However, as immortals, they also can't resist tribulations. There was no need for tribulations from the heaven and earth of a macro world or even from a lesser kiliacosm. It was enough to destroy immortals. Therefore, compared to mortals, immortals were indeed immortal and eternal. However, for a lesser kiliacosm, immortals were nothing. They could die whenever they wanted. As long as their strength increased again, they would become primordial pure young immortals, and the tribulations of a lesser kiliacosm would be helpless against them. In other words, for immortals within a lesser kiliacosm, immortals at the primordial pure young immortal realm were truly immortal and eternal, and so on. If a living being could be strong enough to become a sage, then, as far as he was concerned, the tribulations of the world were nothing out of the ordinary. In the boundless chaos, he could be considered immortal and eternal. Luo Fan's speech was quite long, but it was rare for him to say so much in a long time. These words, however, struck the heart of the tortoise in front of him like a thunderbolt. The tortoise suddenly became sluggish, and its expression kept changing. At this time, everyone in the entire inn instantly felt that something was wrong, because they suddenly felt an extremely oppressive feeling suddenly shrouding everyone's hearts. In a trance, it seemed that a catastrophe was about to befall them, and that something incredible and tragic was about to happen. Ordinary people couldn't find the source of this change at all, but many people in the secular martial arts world discovered the root of this change. This was clearly the feeling of a powerful aura enveloping the entire inn. As for the source of this aura, they traced it back a little and discovered that it actually came from a turtle that was coiled up on the table near the window. It really is a strange beast. Such a thought flashed through the minds of those martial arts world people who had sensed the source of the chi. That tortoise couldn't even transcend to become an immortal. In the eyes of Luo Fan, it was naturally an ant among ants. Pulling out a hair from its head and turning it into a projection could easily crush billions of them. However, this kind of existence was already strong enough for mortals. It was so strong that even the martial arts world masters didn't have enough confidence to fight against it. After those martial arts masters discovered the source of this aura, their expressions all changed drastically. Almost at the same time, they hurriedly fled the inn. He had even forgotten to pay the bill. And at this moment, the waiters, shopkeepers, and others in the inn were all restless because of the oppressive feeling. Seeing that those martial arts world masters were about to leave, they momentarily forgot how terrifying they were. Voices of cursing rang out, and all kinds of rude actions that were originally impossible to do were done without hesitation, causing those martial arts world masters to be quite embarrassed. In front of the tortoise, they were extremely weak and did not even dare to have any thoughts of resisting. But in front of mortals who didn't know martial arts, they were also superior. Normally, They could easily deal with those shopkeepers and waiters with an outburst of strength. But the problem was, how would they dare? That tortoise was the owner's pet. Even if the owner was really just a mortal, if he ordered the tortoise to attack, they would definitely be turned into minced meat. Therefore, they could only pay the bill in an extremely embarrassed manner, and then hurriedly fled like stray dogs. And at this time, the chi that shrouded the entire inn had disappeared without a trace. At this time, that tortoise stood up on the table, its two hind legs bent on the table, and its two front legs hugged each other with difficulty. It kept bowing toward the owner opposite it. Looking at it, it was clearly the appearance of a person kneeling on the ground and constantly bowing. This strange appearance, however, made those ordinary people in the inn dumbfounded. After a while, someone finally praised, "What a good training." It was obvious that this kind of action was trained by the owner himself. These words were easily accepted by everyone. They quickly dispersed, eating and drinking, talking and working. Everything was as if nothing had happened. Thank you for your guidance, great immortal. The tortoise was naturally really kowtowing to Luo Fan, and at the same time, it said so. Luo Fan just smiled and said, "This is just to avoid karma. Although it is just a small effort for great immortal, to this little one, it is a gift of a new life. If not for great immortal's words today, this little one doesn't know how to go on a drinking contest. Although this little one is unfilial, I dare not be ungrateful." With that said, it kowtowed 3 times on the table. Luo Fan did not stop it, nor did he feel proud. His expression was no different from before, and he said, "Don't talk nonsense. Just be a good pet for the next few days." This time, the tortoise seemed to be very active in agreeing, and then began to act like before, eating and drinking to his heart's content. It did not know how to be a pet, but obviously its previous performance met the requirements of the great immortal in front of it, so it naturally had to continue. Luo Fan did not pay much attention to it, and continued to flip through the cultivation wisdom in his hand. "Not bad, not bad. Seeing that you have done a good job in this matter. Your karma of stealing the cultivation wisdom can barely be considered to have come to an end." At this moment, the book was overjoyed. As a spirituality of the cultivation wisdom, it naturally knew. The tortoise in front of it looked exactly the same as before. It seemed to be chewing wantonly without knowing about cultivation. But in reality, it was constantly circulating the power in its body, slowly drawing vitality from the surrounding void and gathering it into its body. Obviously, it finally understood the importance of cultivation. It began to cultivate at all times. Looking at this, it was clear that Luo Fan's words were very effective, and this made it very satisfied. Naturally, Luo Fan did not care about this kind of non-nutritious words. Very quickly, the spirituality began to feel bored. It muttered a few words, and after realizing that Luo Fan did not care about it, it once again turned its attention to the tortoise in front of it and said to the tortoise, "You can't cultivate like this. You are a descendant of the black tortoise, so naturally, you should cultivate the cultivation method of the black tortoise. Look at you now, what kind of nonsense are you cultivating? If you continue to cultivate like this, even if you can quickly live a long life, your future will definitely not be good." After the tortoise was enlightened by Luo Fan, although it somewhat despised the eloquence of the cultivation wisdom, it still knew that the cultivation wisdom was good for it. Therefore, although it did not stop cultivating, it respectfully said, "May I know what pointers you have for me, senior?" Such a respectful attitude made the spirituality quite satisfied. It laughed and said, "You have asked the right person. There are countless cultivation methods of the black tortoise that I have on me. Any one of them is enough to give you endless benefits. I see that you are still teachable, so I will impart one to you." "Thank you, senior. However, I seem to have heard that the best cultivation method should be created according to the condition of one's own body. This is the only way that is most suitable for oneself, and that is the best way to bring out one's potential," the tortoise said respectfully. Although its attitude was respectful, it did not conceal the doubt in its tone. This made the cultivation wisdom feel offended and angry, and it said, "Kid, I just praised you a few times, and your tail is already up in the sky. Of course, creating your own cultivation method is the best. However, you are not even immortal, so what kind of cultivation method are you going to create? It is better to honestly cultivate the methods passed down by the predecessors. And after you have some foundation, you can consider creating your own cultivation method. The tortoise's expression suddenly changed, and it hurriedly said, "Thank you, Senior, please teach me." Oof. The cultivation wisdom was still angry, so it snorted and did not say anything else. The turtle hastily apologized and begged for forgiveness. After a while, the cultivation wisdom finally relented and said, "Seeing your sincerity, I'll give you some benefits. Otherwise, you will not know the immensity of heaven and earth." The tortoise was naturally very grateful, and it said a bunch of good things. I didn't expect that the one who has made the most progress these days is this little thing. Although most of Luo Fan's attention was on the contents of the book in his hand, he also paid attention to the entire process of the conversation between the tortoise and the cultivation wisdom. At this time, this thought suddenly flashed through his mind. Compared to the cultivation wisdom's immaturity, this tortoise appeared to be a lot more slick. This kind of slickness, of course, could not be innate. It was clearly because it had been staying in this inn for more than a month, and under the influence of what it saw and heard, it had learned a lot of the slickness of mortals. At this time, when it used it, it played with the cultivation wisdom in the palm of its hand. While Luo Fan was inwardly lamenting, the cultivation wisdom had already begun to guide the tortoise's cultivation. Although it had been extracted by Luo Fan, the cultivation wisdom still belonged to the tortoise. It was an inheritance left in the tortoise's blood by its ancestor. It naturally spared no effort in guiding the tortoise, and the guidance for the tortoise was so detailed that it even made people feel like it was long-winded. Although the cultivation wisdom was originally in the tortoise's body, after all, its spirituality had not been completely aroused. In the past, the benefits that the tortoise obtained from it were only naturally leaked out. Compared to the complete wisdom of cultivation, it was obviously extremely one-sided. Sorting out some cultivation methods based on these one-sided benefits would naturally result in a lot of negligence. Now that the tortoise's spirituality was guiding it according to the complete cultivation wisdom, the effect was naturally completely different. Soon, the tortoise's appearance became somewhat blurry, and the space around it also slightly distorted. The nature of the power within his body began to change rapidly during this process, and his aura, which was restricted to a few feet around him by the formation he had just set up, continued to rise. Gradually, an extremely simple, heavy, and ancient aura appeared above the increasingly powerful aura. This was clearly a sign that the ancient bloodline was gradually being activated. Chapter 1358. The tortoise's aura changed for a while and finally formed an aura that was incompatible with the demon realm and even the entire Earth's cosmos. This aura was mysterious, simple, and desolate, as if it had come from a long, long time ago. The moment this aura appeared, a cluster of jet-black clouds suddenly condensed in the void. An incomparably powerful energy was condensed on the cloud, and the explosive intent contained within it was extremely strong. Anyone could feel that it was not condensed for the sake of rain. Damn it, why is there a heavenly tribulation? At this time, the cultivation wisdom suddenly screamed, "Isn't this normal? In this world, cultivators will encounter heavenly tribulation when they become immortals. Of course, the heavenly tribulation of this foreign bloodline will be stronger." Luo Fan said with a faint smile, "What did you say? I don't understand." It's up to you whether you understand or not." Luo Fan casually waved his hand, and in an instant, the tortoise appeared in midair, far away from the city. Here, as the light and shadow changed, everything above was completely covered. No living creature below could see what was happening above when they raised their heads. In the eyes of all living beings, there was nothing abnormal in the sky above. It was still blue sky and white jade, still calm and tranquil. "What did you do?" The cultivation wisdom couldn't help but turn pale with fright when the tortoise suddenly disappeared. Of course, I sent it to another place to undergo the heavenly tribulation. I quite like this border gold city, but it was destroyed because of this ordinary heavenly tribulation. What a pity, Luo Fan said lightly. With that, he no longer paid attention to anything else and continued to read the book in his hand. Why isn't the tortoise here today? During this time, someone suddenly came in and found that there was nothing but wine and food in front of Luo Fan. He couldn't help but be curious and came up to ask. Luo Fan smiled and said, "It's nothing. It ate too much, so it's going to the toilet now." Of course, no one believed his words, but it was clear that since Luo Fan had said so, the person who was curious could only listen to him. If he continued to ask, it would not be something that could be explained with just the word curiosity, and his intentions would certainly be suspected. Most people would know how to behave. No, this heavenly tribulation is so powerful. It's far beyond what he can bear. If you don't do anything, my descendant will be finished. The cultivation wisdom shouted. Naturally, Luo Fan was very clear about this. Heavenly tribulation. It was over 100 times more powerful than the heavenly tribulation when a cultivator became an immortal. Heavenly tribulation that was over 100 times more powerful. Even if he had completely activated his ancestral bloodline due to the guidance of the cultivation wisdom, and his strength was many times stronger than ordinary itinerant immortals, he still seemed insignificant in the face of a heavenly tribulation that was 100 times stronger than normal. It could basically be said that he had no chance of success. Luo Fan smiled and said, "Karma has already been settled before," Luo Fan said with a smile. "But it's your pet after all. Also, didn't you give it some pointers before? Do you really have the heart to watch it be struck to death by heavenly tribulation?" The cultivation wisdom said hurriedly. "First of all, I can create thousands of pets at any time. I can even be smarter than it, prettier than it, and 100 times more interesting. Secondly, I've never given it any pointers before. The reason it was able to obtain some of my cultivation mysteries was by chance. It could even be said that you stole it from me," Luo Fan said indifferently. The cultivation wisdom immediately became sluggish. After a good while, it said, "Creation doesn't have the bloodline of another heaven and earth. Oh, you finally admit it? As long as you save it, I'll tell you what you want to know." The cultivation wisdom suddenly opened its mouth with difficulty. The cultivation wisdom didn't have much affection for the tortoise. There was no doubt about this. But even though it didn't have deep affection, it couldn't help but think of all ways to teach and save that tortoise. There was no other reason, because that tortoise was the fundamental reason for the existence of the cultivation wisdom. The reason why the cultivation wisdom existed, the reason why it was produced, was because of the existence of this tortoise. Without this tortoise, the cultivation wisdom would be equivalent to having no value in existence. This was the law engraved in the deepest layer of the cultivation wisdom. It was the support of all of the cultivation wisdom's thoughts and wisdom. If it didn't have that tortoise, the cultivation wisdom's spirituality might be destroyed by itself. This was why the cultivation wisdom had no choice but to use all of its methods to help that tortoise. Luo Fan's eyes flashed, and he said, "Aren't all of your memories here? If I want to know, can't I just rummage through them myself?" Since it had already spoken, the cultivation wisdom also completely threw caution to the wind, but began to worry that Luo Fan wouldn't believe its words. It began to explain clearly to Luo Fan as much as possible, saying, "You're wrong. My main body is indeed this cultivation wisdom. However, there are also other information inherited from my bloodline that is contained in my body. My memories, including the cultivation wisdom, are not limited to this. I do have information about the world that Master came from." Hearing this, Luo Fan suddenly understood. He wasn't afraid that the cultivation wisdom was lying. In any case, that tortoise was an ant among ants in front of him. If he wanted to destroy it, he didn't even need to think about it. As long as there was this tendency, there would naturally be an extremely mysterious power that would destroy the tortoise. In this kind of situation, even if the cultivation wisdom was lying At most, he would have to spend a bit of effort to kill the tortoise, and it wouldn't take too much time. As such, he casually waved his hand and grabbed at the void. Something rapidly gathered in the void, and it became stronger and more obvious. The ripples of power within it became stronger and stronger, and the tribulation clouds seemed to be grabbed by an invisible hand. They suddenly collapsed and turned into endless power that scattered in all directions. However, the moment these scattered power was about to completely disappear, it once again condensed, turning into a dazzling blue ball of lightning. It suddenly sank and fell into the body of the tortoise, who was looking up at the tribulation clouds in shock and despair. This power poured into the tortoise, and its entire body suddenly trembled. Its entire body suddenly exploded, turning into a cloud of blood mist that was wrapped in lightning. Painful roars could be heard from within the blood mist. Then, not long after, the blood mist completely digested the lightning, and it shrank with all its might. It turned into a humanoid figure with the upper body of a human and the lower body of a tortoise with 4 legs. This humanoid figure's upper body looked like that of a 10-year-old boy, but its lower body looked extremely ferocious. If an ordinary person saw it, they would definitely be scared and have nightmares for a few days. This was obviously the form that the tortoise had transformed into. As for why it had transformed into this and not a true human form, the reason was very simple. Because this was also a born Taoism aptitude. But it was not the born Taoism aptitude of this universe on Earth, but a universe that was different from Earth. It was even different from all the perfect worlds that Luo Fan knew. The born Taoism aptitude of all worlds. So this is what the born Taoism aptitude of the world looks like. It's really eye-opening. Luo Fan's eyes reflected the scene above the void, reflecting the appearance that the tortoise had transformed into after becoming an immortal, and he could not help but exclaim in admiration. I've finally seen such a perfect born Taoism aptitude. At this time, the cultivation wisdom also had an inexplicable feeling. Although its voice was young, its tone was extremely vicissitude. However, his words were filled with the vicissitudes of life, as if an old man who had lived for countless years was speaking. After all, the tortoise still remembered what Luo Fan had said. It looked at its own body for a while with nostalgia, and then resisted its obsession. With a turn, it turned into a tortoise the size of a basketball. In a flash, it was already on the table in front of Luo Fan. The tortoise once again performed the kowtowing performance that had appeared once before, and said, "Thank you, great immortal." "Can you say it now?" Luo Fan said lightly. This was obviously not said to the tortoise, but to the spirituality of the cultivation wisdom. The tortoise was not surprised that Luo Fan ignored it. After kowtowing a few times, it returned to its original posture and began to chew on the food and wine that had already turned cold. The cultivation wisdom shouted angrily, "Is there a need to be in such a hurry?" Naturally, Luo Fan would not answer such nonsense. He just waited quietly. The cultivation wisdom spoke for a while, and finally realized that there was no way around it, so it had no choice but to explain. As it spoke, Luo Fan finally knew where the ancestor of the tortoise had come from. That ancestor came from a perfect world called the Xinyang world. The perfect born Taoism aptitude was just like what Luo Fan had seen just now, which was what the tortoise had transformed into after becoming an immortal. The cultivation civilization in that whole world was also extremely developed. There were 36 sages, and the entire world had already gone through 8 great tribulations when the ancestor of the tortoise left the Xinyang world. As long as it survived one more great tribulation, it could be promoted to a great world. Such a world was not only countless times more powerful than the current Earth universe, but also countless times more powerful than the untainted land. As for why the cultivators of the Xinyang world had appeared in the Earth universe, why they had left behind these descendants, and how they had fallen to such a state, the cultivation wisdom did not know. After all, it was only the cultivation wisdom, not the ancestor of the tortoise. It was already quite rare for it to know these things. How could it possibly know all the details? I see. Although there is still a huge gap between the world of 36 sages and the great Tianyuan world of 800 sages, in terms of the perfect world level, it is already incredibly powerful. Luo Fan thought to himself. He had a vague feeling that things were not so simple, and that the Xianyang world was probably carrying out some unfathomable plan. However, these things didn't matter much to him now. He seemed to be in existence of the pseudo-sage level, which was definitely in existence of the highest level in the entire Earth universe. However, compared to the real experts, the sages, and even the level 9 pseudo-sages, he was just a relatively large ant. The various schemes involving the two perfect worlds were still too far away for him. It was so far away that even if he knew everything, it would be impossible for him to have any impact on the development of the matter, regardless of whether it was good or bad. Under such circumstances, why should he care about the matters between the Xianyang world and the Earth universe? Therefore, he did not care about the news. He had only heard about it. He did not take it to heart at all. As for the cultivation wisdom, he only asked about the various landscapes of the Xianyang world, about its various wonders, and about the deeds of the sages in that world. Compared to the sages in the Earth universe, no one had ever seen a real sage except for the disciples of the sages. The 36 sages in the Xianyang world, on the other hand, were particularly lively. Almost every tens of thousands of years or hundreds of thousands of years, there would be a sage who would preach the Tao to all living beings in the world. Therefore, as long as the living beings lived a little longer, they would be able to live for a long time. Therefore, as long as the living beings lived a little longer, they would be able to see the existence of the sages. Since the sages had appeared many times, there were naturally all kinds of deeds passed down. There were quite a lot of things that the cultivation wisdom could talk about. The cultivation wisdom had already made an agreement with Luo Fan before, so it had to talk about it even if it did not want to. What's more, it was actually quite happy to talk about it. Therefore, under such circumstances, the cultivation wisdom began to talk nonstop, describing all kinds of legends about the sages. It was truly vivid and lifelike, making one feel as if they were in the same place. Through this kind of narration, Luo Fan also learned a lot about the ways of the sages in the world. He seemed to have some understanding in his heart. However, it was also very vague and difficult to explain clearly. However, regardless of whether he could explain it clearly or not, he had still gained something. He felt that he had a deeper understanding of the mentality of the sages. At least, this was the case for the sages of the Xianyang world for the sages of the Xianyang world. Everything in the world was just an illusion. All the gratitude and grudges between mortals seemed to be meaningless to them. There was only one thing they cared about, and that was to nurture their companions. This mentality, is it only the sages of the Xianyang world, or are all the sages like this? Luo Fan frowned and thought. Such doubts. Of course, he could not come up with any answer. How could he understand the existence of the sages at his current level? After sighing, Luo Fan put this aside and began to pay attention to other things. Does that mean that in the entire profound Yang world, almost everyone has a sage's mark? Sage's mark? You mean sage wisdom, right? At first, the cultivation wisdom did not understand what Luo Fan was talking about, but it quickly reacted. If you're talking about sage wisdom, that is natural. In our world, almost everyone has seen a certain sage, so they can naturally obtain the sage wisdom of a certain sage. This is much better than the stingy sages of your world. Speaking of this, the cultivation wisdom had an inexplicable sense of superiority. It is called sage wisdom, but it is worthy of its name. Luo Fan smiled slightly. He did not care about the sarcasm in the cultivation wisdom's words, and said, "It turns out that the sage's mark is so popular. No wonder it can develop such a condensing method of cultivation wisdom." He originally felt that although the nature of this cultivation wisdom was completely different from his level 4 false sage mark, it was somewhat similar in nature. Now that he heard that the sage's mark was so popular in the Xianyang world, he suddenly realized that this cultivation wisdom was clearly developed from the sage's mark. It was a product simulated by the experts of a Xianyang world through their understanding of the structure of the sage's mark. Although the sage's mark was mysterious and incredible, it had been widely spread for countless years and had been studied day and night by countless geniuses born in a perfect world. It was really normal for someone to be able to study the structure of the sage's mark. Is that so? When the cultivation wisdom heard Luo Fan's words, it hesitated for a while. Obviously, it did not know where the condensing method of cultivation wisdom came from. After all, this was just a cultivation wisdom, and it was not the tortoise's ancestor. It could naturally know some things in its memory, but would be a little difficult for it to deduce things that it did not know. Of course, Luo Fan would not explain to it how similar the nature of cultivation wisdom was to the sage's mark. He just kept asking the cultivation wisdom about various things about the Xianyang world. In this process, time continued to pass, and Luo Fan's understanding of the Xianyang world became more and more profound. A few days later, when Luo Fan was finally satisfied, the cultivation wisdom no longer had the desire to speak. It had completely changed from its previous chatty character to a person of few words. Even when the tortoise asked for advice, it was too lazy to pay attention to it. Only when the question was really critical and closely related to the future of the tortoise would it reluctantly open its mouth to answer. Although this kind of change had a rather negative impact on the tortoise, it brought Luo Fan a rare peace, which made Luo Fan feel a kind of unexpected joy. The tortoise also heard the conversation between Luo Fan and the cultivation wisdom. However, compared to Luo Fan's great interest, the tortoise had no interest at all. Those words entered its left ear and immediately came out of its right ear. It did not take it to heart at all. After all, even if the Xianyang world was its origin and its hometown, it had no meaning at all for the current tortoise. Could it be that knowing that it came from the Xianyang world could enhance its cultivation? Could it be that knowing this would allow it to obtain the cultivation resources of the Xianyang world? That was obviously impossible. Chapter 1359. Luo Fan had been living a leisurely life in Jin City for 300 years. In these 300 years, the people in the city had changed 4 or 5 times. When Luo Fan first arrived, all the people living in the city had already turned into dust. Even the descendants of their descendants were now old and frail. Luo Fan had been living in the city for a very long time compared to ordinary people. He usually spent most of his time in his inn, sitting at the table by the window and reading. Occasionally, he would stroll around the city and watch the various interesting activities in the city. His days were quite leisurely. His appearance had not changed in the past 300 years. Under normal circumstances, everyone in the city would have known that he was not ordinary. However, because of Luo Fan's mental power, no one in the city noticed his abnormality. For everyone who knew Luo Fan was just a very ordinary and elegant young man. Many people even thought that they had grown up with Luo Fan and could remember Luo Fan's appearance when he was a child. This mysterious power was often praised by the turtle, who was Luo Fan's pet. Such a method was simply too high-end for the tortoise to handle. Although the turtle was already an individual immortal and was extremely powerful, it could destroy the entire city with a slap. However, this ability to adjust and adapt the memories of everyone in the city without any action or magical power was far beyond the scope of its understanding. Every time it saw the old man who had seen it since it was a child recall Luo Fan's appearance when he was a child wearing open-crotch pants, it found it funny. It would feel inexplicably shocked. As for the wisdom of cultivation, it naturally did not feel anything special about this. After all, for it, which had recorded the endless mysteries of cultivation and even the mysteries of the pseudo-sage level, this ability to adjust the memories of all the living creatures around it was very common. On this day, Luo Fan finally turned to the last page of the book that he had been reading for 300 years. The book closed instantly. An indescribable expression of understanding appeared on his face. 300 years to read a book, this was something only Luo Fan, who had eternal time and only cared about cultivation, a powerful existence who only cared about raising his cultivation realm, could do. As he closed the book, the aura on his body changed slightly, and his essence seemed to have received some kind of subtle upgrade. This was a sign that his cultivation realm had increased. After reading the entire cultivation wisdom, he had a deep understanding of the profound Yang world's cultivation system. He also had a concrete understanding of the worldview of all living beings in the profound Yang world. Through the understanding of this worldview, however, he felt that his worldview had improved a little. It turned out that some of the existences that were a little vague had been enlightened by the profound Yang world's completely different worldview. Everything became much clearer, and the integrity of this worldview. Naturally, it would lead to the improvement of his cultivation level. It was normal for him to have such progress. After the increase in his cultivation realm, Luo Fan had already broken away from the state of a grade 4 pseudo-sage and became a grade 4 pseudo-sage that could be said to have achieved small success. You finished reading. Then why don't you quickly put me into the body of my descendant? I think it's about to be brainwashed by your cultivation wisdom again. At this moment, such a voice came from the book in Luo Fan's hand. Although this cultivation wisdom had become silent because of Luo Fan's almost exhaustive inquiries, it could not remain silent for a few days. After a few days, he became even more talkative and noisy than before. If it wasn't for Luo Fan's firm Tao heart, this spirituality might have already been erased in the past 300 years, as for what it said in its words. Luo Fan's cultivation wisdom pointed to. Obviously, it was the grade 4 pseudo-sage mark that the tortoise had received when it saw Luo Fan's body. For the cultivation wisdom that called the sage mark sage wisdom, this kind of mark was essentially the same as the sage mark, but the level was so much lower. Obviously, it was cultivation wisdom, although it was a little different from his cultivation wisdom. Hearing this, Luo Fan smiled and said, "Of course it's not a problem to put it in, but I'm afraid I'll have to do the same thing this time. I'll fight back. If that's the case, it's impossible for your spirituality to be preserved. You have to think it through. There's no need. It doesn't have to be the same as before. I think it's pretty good to fight our way in like this," cultivation wisdom said. Hearing this, the cultivation wisdom couldn't help but feel terrified. This was also very obvious. Anyone with intelligence, even if it was just a strand of spirituality, would reject death and extinction. Hearing that he was going to be erased was no different from hearing that he was going to be killed. Of course, it couldn't agree without a struggle. "That won't do. If I leave you there, wouldn't I be sowing karma again?" Luo Fan said lightly. He was now relaxed and in the mood to tease the cultivation wisdom. "Luo Fan, why aren't you reading today?" At this time, a clear and pleasantly surprised voice came from the door. Luo Fan turned his head to look and found a 16 or 17-year-old girl. Her eyes were as round as two sparkling crystals. Her appearance was extremely cute, and her figure was extremely well-proportioned. She had a look of surprise on her face. In these 300 years, Luo Fan hadn't done anything out of the ordinary. Even his image could barely be called handsome. In the eyes of ordinary people, he was so old-fashioned that women didn't like him. However, to each their own, there had been women who had taken a fancy to him over the years. Although most of them maintained a reserved attitude and did not take the initiative to pursue him, there were also many who were like this woman in front of him, who would come here for a few hours almost every day and serve him attentively, wanting to attract his attention. "Yes, I've finished reading." Luo Fan smiled. He naturally couldn't accept this girl. It wasn't just the difference in strength, but also the girl's parents, ancestors, and ancestors. He had watched them grow up from when they were still wearing diapers. Even this girl, he had clearly seen her grow up from when she was still wearing diapers. Under such circumstances, he could only look at this girl like an elder looking at a junior. Even if he wanted to experience the secular life and enjoy a secular marriage, he still wouldn't choose this girl. "I've finally finished reading." "That's great. How about you accompany me to the temple fair today?" The woman arrived in front of Li Hao's table. The girl came to Li Hao's table and said with a blushing face, "So it's time for the temple fair again." Luo Fan sighed. The woman couldn't hear the deep emotions in his words. She said expectantly, "That's right. The temple fair is so fun. There are many people performing acrobatics. Let's go. Forget it. You know I don't like crowds. How can you not like crowds? I remember you didn't like it very much when you were young. The girl said in surprise. Hee hee, people will always grow up. At this moment, a voice came from the door. The girl's expression stiffened when she heard this voice. She turned her head to look. Father, she shouted and pounced on the person who spoke. She hugged the person who spoke and cried. Ha ha, I didn't expect to see you after so many years. You've grown up so much. Let me see. How is my dear daughter now? The person laughed loudly. He wiped away the girl's tears as he carefully looked at her. His eyes were filled with guilt and sorrow. Luo Fan glanced at the person and smiled. This person looked like a middle-aged man. He was the girl's father. He had also grown up after being looked at by Luo Fan. However, he had already left Gold City 10 years ago. It was said that he was going to the Immortal Mountain to seek the Tao. He had only returned now. The middle-aged man comforted the girl for a long time before she stopped crying. Then, he told the girl to go home and prepare some food. He wanted to use her cooking often. Although the girl was reluctant to part, she still cared about her father's thoughts. After bidding farewell to Luo Fan, she quickly left the inn. As for the middle-aged man, he stayed in the middle of the battle. After the girl left, he walked up to Luo Fan's table and bowed. I didn't know that Senior was here. Please forgive me for my previous offense. Luo Fan chuckled. Ignorance is not a crime. I didn't expect you to reach immortality in 10 short years. It seems like you had a fortuitous encounter. That's right. After leaving the city for 10 years, the middle-aged man was no longer immortal. He wasn't even a regular cultivator. He had ascended to immortality. At this moment, he was an itinerant immortal. His cultivation realm was comparable to that of the tortoise that was curled up in front of Luo Fan. Faintly, he even surpassed it a little, ascending to immortality in 10 years, and this included finding the gate to immortality. This speed could be considered a miracle. My cultivation is not worth mentioning in front of Senior, the middle-aged man said respectfully. The memories of all living beings in the city were obscured and adjusted. This change wasn't caused by Luo Fan's spell. Instead, the world naturally changed due to Luo Fan's arrival. It was a change born from his thoughts. Although the effect was wondrous, it wasn't of a high level. As long as living beings had a breakthrough in their life essence, they would be able to avoid this effect. They would be able to recover their obscured memories. Ascending to immortality was clearly a breakthrough in one's life essence. Therefore, the middle-aged man completely recovered his memories after ascending to immortality. What Luo Fan looked like when he was young, what Luo Fan looked like when he grew up, what the inn was like when he was young, and what it would be like when he grew up, everything was restored in an instant. At that moment, he knew that Luo Fan was a real expert. He either had some scheme or had some unspeakable hidden trouble for staying here. If he didn't do anything about it, it would definitely cause unpredictable consequences to his hometown. It was because of this thought that after he ascended to immortality, he paid a huge price and returned to Gold City as quickly as possible, despite the obstruction of his sect. He wanted to see with his own eyes what kind of person Luo Fan was, what was his motive for hiding here, and whether he would cause any harm to Gold Border City. However, when he saw Luo Fan clearly, he no longer had the suspicions he had before. In other words, he didn't dare to have the suspicions he had before. This was because Luo Fan's power had reached an unimaginable level. When he looked at Luo Fan, he had a feeling that even the omnipotent sect master of his sect was far inferior to him. In front of him, he was just like an ant. To him, this city was something that he could casually create at any time. How could he have any conspiracy or plot against this place? It was because of this that he behaved so respectfully just now. Not bad, not bad. Look at my pet. It has been cultivating in front of me every day, and it hasn't improved at all for 10 years. You can become an itinerant immortal from a mortal in 10 years, which is enough to boast in any place, Luo Fan said with a smile. This is clearly the result of experiencing a long time in another space and time. I don't believe you can't see it. At this time, The cultivation wisdom suddenly spoke. Mortals naturally couldn't hear what the cultivation wisdom said, but the man in front of him was already an itinerant immortal and was no longer immortal. He could clearly hear what the cultivation wisdom said. When he heard the voice, the middle-aged man's expression changed slightly, not only because the book could speak, but also because of the content of the book. Although he was only an itinerant immortal, he was considered to be experienced and knowledgeable in his sect. He knew that an object that could speak, apart from strange appearance, could only be a magic treasure. In other words, this book, which had been held in the hands of his senior since he was young, was actually an unfathomably powerful magic treasure. How could he, who had never paid any attention to the book, not be shocked? Apart from that, the book could actually see through him at a glance. It could tell that he had spent most of these years cultivating in the land of Tina, which was equivalent to a year in the real world, which shocked him even more. One must know, this secret of his was something that even the seemingly omnipotent sect master of his sect couldn't see through. You talk too much. Luo Fan calmly smashed the book on the table. Aya, the cultivation wisdom instantly felt a surge of power that wasn't very strong. However, an unimaginably strange power poured into his body, bringing indescribable pain to his spirituality. He couldn't help but cry out in agony. This was clearly because Luo Fan was displeased with his interruption, so he directly taught a lesson. Hearing Luo Fan teach the book a lesson, how could the man not understand? Although the senior in front of him didn't say anything, he could tell at a glance that he had been cultivating in a space-time that had a completely different flow of time from the outside world all these years. For a moment, he began to regret his decision to return to Gold City. As a cultivator who had entered a cultivation sect, he had a clear understanding of the value of various treasures in cultivation. A space-time that flowed faster than the outside world was incomparably precious in the cultivation world. Even a space-time that was several times faster than the outside world was enough to make any cultivator want to kill and steal their treasures. Moreover, the space-time that he had discovered had a time flow that was more than 100 times faster than the outside world. One could imagine how attractive this was to other cultivators. Panicking, the middle-aged man impulsively raised his hand and pointed at Luo Fan. In the blink of an eye, a flying sword instantly rushed out from his finger, turned into a blue light, and fiercely rushed towards Luo Fan, directly circling around his neck. Seeing the flying sword go around Luo Fan's neck, the man was overjoyed. However, he didn't expect this person to be so weak. He looked so strong on the outside, but he was actually so weak that he couldn't even withstand one of his swords. That's a very good flying sword. While the middle-aged man was overjoyed, Luo Fan smiled and waved his hand. The flying sword directly fell into his hand. As for his neck, it was unscathed. Although the flying sword was made of a very special material and contained dozens of layers of the void, it was only a magic tool. Even if he was 100 million times weaker, the flying sword wouldn't be able to hurt him at all. How could he be injured just because the flying sword went around him? Compressing the void and turning it into a substance is a very good idea. The person who refined this magic tool is quite unique. Luo Fan carefully examined the flying sword, his face full of admiration. At this time, the middle-aged man's smile froze. His body gradually began to tremble. Thump! He directly knelt on the ground and continuously kowtowed to Luo Fan, saying, "Senior, please spare my life." Luo Fan couldn't help but frown. When he saw that this person had become an immortal, he thought that his mind was very firm. He didn't expect him to be so useless. This made Luo Fan, who originally didn't want to argue with him, finally change his mind. With a thought, he casually grabbed the middle-aged man's head. In an instant, the middle-aged man's memories were instantly grabbed by him and turned into a ball of blue light in his hand. Why am I here? After being grabbed, the middle-aged man's eyes went blank. After a short while, he regained consciousness, but he had completely lost his memories. He touched the back of his head in a daze and murmured, "Go back. Your family is still waiting for you." You've been missing for 10 years, and now you're kneeling in front of me as soon as you return. What's wrong with you? If your daughter sees this, she might think that I did something to you." Luo Fan waved his hand and said to him. Only then did he realize his position. He couldn't help but blush and quickly got up. He wanted to ask Luo Fan about it, but he realized that Luo Fan couldn't be bothered with him. He only looked at his palm as if there was some treasure there. Chapter 1360. So, it's just a lesser chiliocosm that can change the flow of time. I didn't expect that such a world would be treated as a treasure by someone, and even attacked me because of it. Luo Fan looked through the memories and did not know whether to laugh or cry. Adjusting the flow of time was really a simple thing for him. Even when he was still an individual immortal, he could already refine a magic treasure that could distort time. Not to mention now, although the law of the demonic realm was merged with the great Tao, and it was more troublesome to adjust the flow of time, it was only something that could be done by an individual immortal to the primordial yang level. In fact, it was really not very precious. Under such circumstances, this person, who had already joined a cultivation sect, and it was a sect that obviously had a Khanate Grand Luo cultivator, still cared so much about such a lesser chiliocosm. Such shallow knowledge and such short-sightedness really made Luo Fan speechless. Hey, this lesser chiliocosm seems to be a little special. It doesn't seem to be an ordinary lesser chiliocosm that can distort time. Luo Fan looked through the middle-aged man's memories, carefully savoring all kinds of things about that lesser chiliocosm, and suddenly made some wonderful discoveries. Everything in that lesser chiliocosm looked very normal, but it had a peculiar characteristic, and that was there seemed to be many relics that should not have existed in a lesser chiliocosm. Hey, what are you going to do with me? Can't you give me a definite answer? Raising the knife up high, but not letting it fall, it gives people a lot of psychological pressure. Okay. At this time, Yi Zichen's expression changed. At this time, the cultivation wisdom in Luo Fan's hand shouted, "Oh, so you're so anxious to be erased. It seems that giving you more time to enjoy the feeling of survival is a bit unnecessary." Luo Fan heard it and laughed. "Stop, stop, stop." The cultivation wisdom was shocked and hurriedly said, "I didn't mean that." "Then what do you mean?" Luo Fan looked at it with interest, but in his heart, he put the matter of that lesser chiliocosm aside. After all, he had listened to this cultivation wisdom for 300 years, and even if he had no feelings for it, he still felt a little close to it. It was quite interesting to tease it. "I think it's better for me to stay like this. This bit of spirituality of mine is hard to come by. Don't you think it's a pity to wipe it away like this?" The spirituality said, "I don't think there's anything to it. You have the cultivation wisdom of a level 6 pseudo-sage, so you should know that it is extremely easy for an existence like me to create the same cultivation wisdom as you. So, I don't think it's a pity at all." Luo Fan smiled. This is the moment. The cultivation wisdom finally panicked. It just kept saying, "I still think it's a pity. If it had a body, it would be sweating profusely. Have you thought it through? If you've thought it through, then you'll be fine." "I'm going to start," Luo Fan said with a smile. "Can I not?" Cultivation wisdom could only helplessly say in the end. "Then what do you suggest?" Luo Fan asked curiously. "I think my descendant has already obtained my true inheritance. In the future, if he continues to cultivate according to the method, he will naturally be able to cultivate to the peak. I don't need to guide him in his body anymore. So I'll just follow you. Although in your eyes, I'm nothing special, I'm still a book that can speak. I feel that it is quite interesting." Cultivation wisdom said, with a strong sense of righteousness. "Ha ha!" Luo Fan laughed. "If that's what you say, then so be it. But I've already finished reading the things recorded in your book. There won't be any benefits if I keep bringing you along. How about I refine you again and give you some other abilities? You can help me collect all the books in the secular world." Luo Fan said. Now, as long as the cultivation wisdom could survive, it wouldn't be able to do anything. It immediately said, "That's how it should be. That's how it should be." It immediately said, "That's how it should be. That's how it should be." Luo Fan chuckled. He raised his hand and patted the cultivation wisdom. In an instant, it was unknown how many hundreds of millions of changes occurred in the blink of an eye. In an instant, the nature of the cultivation wisdom that was like a book was changed billions of times by the hundreds of millions of changes brought about by this slap. In the blink of an eye, it had turned into an even more ancient and unadorned book. After this transformation, the image of a head with 3 eyes and 6 ears suddenly appeared on the book. After the head with 3 eyes and 6 ears appeared, its 3 eyes flickered rapidly and its 6 ears shook rapidly. It was as if it had seen and heard countless things in an instant. As the head changed, the pages of the ordinary book that seemed to have been left over from thousands of years ago began to quickly flip. Countless tiny words and pictures began to appear on the pages. The book didn't look very thick, only a few dozen pages at most. However, as it flipped through the pages, it flipped through thousands of pages every second. Even after flipping for 2 to 4 hours, the book still didn't finish. It continued to flip, as if the number of pages in the book was simply endless. After more than 2 hours, the 3-eyed, 6-eared head finally stopped moving. This book, which was constantly turning pages, had just reached the end of the page. These are all the books that exist in the Great Light Nation. I think it's enough for you to read. You'll have to wait for a period of time to record a wider range, the head with 3 eyes and 6 ears said. That voice was the voice of the cultivation wisdom. However, this appearance is really a bit too depressing. My original appearance was that of the supreme black tortoise. How did I end up with such an ugly appearance with only a head, 3 eyes, and 6 ears? That cultivation wisdom finally couldn't bear the annoyance in his heart and complained to Luo Fan. Faced with such complaints, Luo Fan glanced at it and said, "From my point of view of beauty, this is the appearance that is able to receive information and record words and images." He said, "From my aesthetic point of view, this is what it looks like to be able to receive information and record words and images. To me, the appearance of a black tortoise is the ugly one. Are you trying to challenge my point of view of beauty?" The cultivator of wisdom was rendered speechless by these words. He could only helplessly disperse his head and sink back into the book. Luo Fan looked at the book and smiled slightly. He didn't put it away, but he also didn't start to read the endless books recorded on it. Instead, he stood up. With a light step, he brought his pet directly to the foot of a mountain on the island. This was the entrance to the small Kiliacosm. The small Kiliacosm was attached to the demon realm. It was different from the other vast thousand domains. It was impossible to open a space-time channel to enter from any location. Instead, it was necessary to find the attachment point of the small Kiliacosm. That was to find the location of the small Kiliacosm. Only then could the channel be opened to enter the small Kiliacosm. Therefore, in the Golden Border City, Luo Fan couldn't directly open the door of the small Kiliacosm and enter it. He had to come to the location in the memory of the middle-aged man to have this possibility. Of course, if Luo Fan was willing, he could even directly put away the small Kiliacosm. In that case, he didn't need to be in a specific location. He could open the door of the small Kiliacosm at any location. There is such a place on this island. When Luo Fan came here, he couldn't help but frown. Such a thought flashed through his mind. This mountain looked very ordinary. If he didn't carefully experience it, even Luo Fan couldn't see anything unusual about the gasoline. But after discovering that the small Kiliacosm was somewhat abnormal, Luo Fan began to carefully experience everything here. Finally, he discovered the mystery hidden under the ordinary surface of this mountain. Behind this mountain, or to be more precise, underneath this mountain, there was an existence that possessed boundless and terrifying power. This kind of power, even if Luo Fan faced it personally, he felt a sense of fear. One could imagine how powerful it was. At this time, Luo Fan's interest in the small Kiliacosm had decreased a lot. Instead, his interest in this mountain had greatly increased. He was now a 4th-level pseudo-sage, and he had achieved initial success. Normally speaking, he was much stronger than a 4th-level pseudo-sage. One could well imagine how strong he was. in order to make him feel fear and trepidation. Just how vast and terrifying was this power. There was no need to think about it at all. It must be at least the power of a 4th-level pseudo-sage. There's actually a 4th-level pseudo-sage hidden on this small island, and I even met him. Luo Fan smiled bitterly. Something that could be caught by Luo Fan naturally couldn't stop Luo Fan. He calculated carefully and found a way to find the power that made him feel fear. With a thought, he waved his hand in the void in front of him. In an instant, a door appeared in front of him. Behind the door was a gray space that seemed to contain everything, but also seemed to contain nothing at all. As the door opened, the aura of the power that made Luo Fan feel fear suddenly became extremely clear. It was as if it was right in front of him, and Luo Fan's clothes were in a mess. An indescribable malice was emitted from it. "Hey, what are you trying to do? If you want to go inside, why don't you leave me outside first?" Cultivation Wisdom suddenly shouted. "It seems that you know what's inside." Luo Fan laughed when he heard this. "I don't know, but I feel that the thing inside is very dangerous and familiar." Cultivation Wisdom didn't evade this time and directly told him what it felt. "I seem to have the same feeling." At this time, Luo Fan's pet also spoke. "It seems that it's something related to the profound Yang world." Luo Fan looked at it and couldn't help but frown. He had just learned about the existence of the profound Yang world, and the things of the profound Yang world began to appear one after another. This really made him feel a little strange. However, after thinking about it, he knew that this was very normal. The descendants of the cultivators of the profound Yang world were found by him on an uninhabited island nearby. Obviously, that cultivator had left some traces in the vicinity, and there was something related to the profound Yang world on this island. That couldn't be any more normal. "So that's how it is." Luo Fan nodded. He directly stepped into the door. Why don't you listen to me at all? I clearly said that it's very dangerous, and you clearly nodded. Why are you still acting on your own?" Cultivation Wisdom cried out in panic. Although the tortoise didn't say anything, its expression also became extremely unsightly. Compared to Luo Fan, it clearly believed in Cultivation Wisdom more. After all, it was dug out from its head. Naturally, Luo Fan didn't care about what Cultivation Wisdom and his pet thought. He seemed to casually step into the door, but in fact he had already raised his vigilance to the highest level. Even the Divine Court Heavenly Cauldron, a level 9 pseudo-sage treasure, was already eager to try it out. He was ready to take it out at any time to resist all dangers that might be beyond his ability with such a defense. Even if there was any danger in this space, he was confident that he would be able to deal with it. Roar! A loud roar rang out the moment Luo Fan stepped into the space. Then, a figure with the legs of a tortoise and the body of a human appeared in front of him and suddenly raised its hand to slap at Luo Fan. With this slap, heaven and earth changed, and an indescribable sweetness filled the void. This kind of sweetness was extremely wonderful. The moment he smelled it, he felt as if he was about to explode. Even Luo Fan felt his body become sluggish, and it was difficult for him to exert his strength. My goodness, what a wonderful method! Luo Fan couldn't help but exclaim. His body shook. Magic power surged. This sweetness that could even erode time and space was completely isolated by him. His body and his strength became agile and unparalleled again. The flawless state allowed him to exert his strongest strength at any time, so that he had no weaknesses at all. This sweetness was strange to him, and he had almost never encountered it before. But it couldn't cause him any pressure at all. He could completely get rid of it with just a thought, but it didn't seem to affect him at all. After getting rid of the sweetness influence on him, Luo Fan's figure flashed, and he raised his hand to poke at the figure that had just appeared. This poke, it seemed to wrap up the entire space, and even poke at the other party with the other party's strength. The strength of the poke had reached a terrifying level that the other party couldn't resist at all. Although the figure was powerful, it was barely at the level of a level 4 pseudo-sage, which was equivalent to Luo Fan. How could it resist such a poke? In an instant, the palm and the body were all pierced by this poke. The whole body suddenly exploded, and instantly turned into various kinds of gray and blended into the surrounding void, as if it had never been there. Dead. This is the seamless domain. It will constantly create a life of the same strength as the person who entered to attack and kill the person who entered. Anyone who enters here will only be exhausted to death. The cultivation wisdom cried out in horror. The head with 3 eyes and 6 ears appeared, and its face was ashen, as if it had lost its parents. Only a life of the same strength as the person who entered? This doesn't seem to be much of a threat. Luo Fan shook his head, but there was a look of disappointment on his face. The other him, created by the sage, was not much of a threat to him, let alone this kind of creation that was obviously not the method of the sage. This kind of existence, no matter how many of them there were, did it matter to him? At this moment, in front of Luo Fan, 2 creatures that were exactly the same as before appeared. The number is actually still increasing. Dead. The cultivation wisdom screamed in horror. Luo Fan still did not care. Without waiting for the other party to attack, he raised his hand and gently waved it. The 2 figures were instantly imprisoned by him and appeared in a thumb-sized sphere that fell directly into his hand. The cultivation wisdom screams came to an abrupt end. Deliberately mystifying, Luo Fan muttered, and his eyes shone with a bright light. In an instant, a lot of information and many mysteries of this entire space were reflected in his eyes, and they continuously poured out in torrents. This space had no boundaries at all, and there was infinite space in all directions. Just now, he had seen the process of the 2 figures condensing in the void twice. The first time, because he had just entered, he did not notice too many mysteries. But the second time, he had already caught a trace of it. At this moment, he was immersed in the mysteries of this space. Following the trace he had caught earlier, he quickly found the core of this space. So, it is a level 8 pseudo-divine treasure. After discovering the core, Luo Fan could not help but be overjoyed. With a light step, his body passed through the layers of obstacles and directly entered the depths of this space. He arrived at a place where there was only a huge cylinder floating in the void. This cylinder was as smooth as a mirror. Standing in front of it, Luo Fan could clearly see his deformed figure on the cylinder. You were actually able to discover me. You have passed my test. Come on, refine me. As long as you refine me, you will be able to obtain a powerful treasure, and your strength will increase by at least 10,000 times. A voice suddenly came from the cylinder. Next, the cylinder began to change in a delicate and complex manner. In an instant, it turned from a cylinder into a figure that looked exactly like Luo Fan, but was 100 times larger than Luo Fan. It lowered its head and moved in front of Luo Fan. Its eyes revealed a sense of urgency. Luo Fan watched the changes of the treasure and listened to its words. However, his face showed no expression, and his movements did not show anything. It was as if everything in front of him did not exist. Chapter 1361. I don't think that's a good idea. Luo Fan smiled. The huge Luo Fan looked at Luo Fan with an inexplicable glint in his eyes. He suddenly laughed and said, "You're actually so cautious. It's a pity. I originally wanted to solve the problem easily, but it seems that there's no way." As he spoke, the huge Luo Fan's body shook, and in an instant, hundreds of millions of worlds appeared around him, turning the originally empty void into an indescribably wonderful scene. Countless worlds piled up around Luo Fan's body, forming layers of mini kiliocosms. At this moment, Luo Fan felt that all kinds of different time dimensions were acting on his body, causing every part of his body to be in a completely different time dimension from each other. This completely different time dimension produced an unimaginably terrifying force that pulled at him, wanting to completely tear his entire body apart and bring every part of his body into a completely different time dimension. So that's how the mini kiliocosms come about. Luo Fan could not help but smile when he felt the changes in the many kiliocosms around him. His flawless state not only allowed others to see him and form a corresponding imprint, but it was also a state that was almost perfect in all senses. This was true even in terms of time and space. Although he could not be like a sage, where his own time and space were completely unaffected by the time and space of the outside world, he could still ensure the stability of his own time and space even in a state of chaos. However, he already had this independence similar to time and space. Although it was far from comparable to a sage, for a mini chiliocosm, this independence of time and space was already quite absolute. With just a thought, in an instant, the many different time dimensions acting on almost every part of his body were instantly isolated by him. Although they still existed, they still tried to pull every part of him into the corresponding time dimension. However, there was no longer any effect. It could only continue to work around his body. It could no longer make his body feel the feeling of being split due to the different time dimensions. How was this possible? An incredulous voice came from nowhere. It was the voice of the level 8 pseudo-divine treasure. What's impossible about it? You want to use such a method to deal with me? In your dreams. Luo Fan smiled faintly, and the mana within his body shook. In an instant, a terrifying destructive force radiated from his body, causing the countless small worlds around him to completely collapse. The space that had been submerged by the countless small worlds returned to its original state. The appearance of the grade 8 pseudo-divine treasure appeared before him again. At this time, this magic treasure was no longer the enlarged version of Luo Fan, but restored to the cylindrical shape that Luo Fan saw at the beginning. However, compared to the smooth surface at the beginning, an extremely strange face had appeared on the surface of the cylinder. There were 2 eyes on the face. It had 2 nostrils and 1 mouth, but it was covered in countless fine and dense scales. As the scales trembled, a horrifying cracking sound could be heard. Even an 8th level false saint would have to be careful when dealing with such an attack. How can mere 4th level false saint like you block it so easily? The face said, "This sort of thing, it's hard to explain to you," Luo Fan said. After saying that, he ignored the level 8 pseudo-sage and asked the book in his hand, "Do you have any information about this thing in your memory?" "There seems to be, but there doesn't seem to be." The book-like cultivation wisdom in Luo Fan's hand replied. Its words were mixed with meaning that it seemed to know something, but it was unable to confirm it, or perhaps it was unwilling to say it. "What is it? Tell me," Luo Fan asked. "It is said that the core of the seamless domain is a type of innate magic treasure. They all seem to have their own intelligence and were magical treasures that were close to living beings." The magic treasure in front of him looked exactly like that type of magic treasure. "However, these are just rumors. I've never seen it before," the cultivation wisdom said. "Innate magic treasure? It has its own intelligence." Luo Fan looked at the cylinder in front of him and couldn't help but be interested. Innate magic treasure. Could it be that it was directly born from the state of chaos and was in existence on the same level as the chaotic creatures? What was so special about such an existence? He was quite interested in it. "However, if it's an innate magic treasure, you're really too weak," Luo Fan said with a smile. With a smile, he raised his hand and pointed. In an instant, a heavenly cauldron appeared out of thin air and covered the cylinder in an instant. No matter how the cylinder struggled and how the face that appeared on it roared and cursed, the cylinder was easily absorbed into the heavenly cauldron. As the cylinder was absorbed, the heavenly cauldron began to shake violently. It looked as if there was a terrifying force that was destroying the cauldron intensely. The entire heavenly cauldron seemed to be overwhelmed, as if it could collapse and be destroyed at any time. Seeing this, Luo Fan frowned. The power of this level 8 pseudo-holy treasure was more powerful than he had imagined. One had to know that although the heavenly cauldron was refined by skimping on materials and did not have as many special materials as other real level 9 pseudo-holy treasures, it was still a level 9 pseudo-holy treasure after all. Even if it could not withstand a single blow from an ordinary level 9 pseudo-holy treasure, it was absolutely supreme in front of a level 8 pseudo-holy treasure. Under such circumstances, the level 8 pseudo-holy treasure was actually able to collide with the level 9 pseudo-holy treasure to such a sorry state. It even looked like it was about to collapse. How could an ordinary level 8 pseudo-holy treasure have this kind of power? With a thought, Luo Fan took a step forward and arrived above the level 9 pseudo-holy treasure. The magic power in his body frantically poured into the heavenly cauldron of divine court. At the same time, endless power was born in his body out of thin air. It was recondensed into strands of magic power, constantly replenishing the magic power that he had consumed. Although Luo Fan's magic power was extremely weak compared to the heavenly cauldron itself. However, when he poured his magic power into it, it was equivalent to the transcendent artifact being wielded by someone. The power of the transcendent artifact itself could be unleashed even more. Naturally, its power would be much stronger than the transcendent artifact that he could raise with his magic power. With such a change, the heavenly cauldron quickly stabilized. The shaking and struggling became smaller and smaller. In the end, after dozens of breaths, it finally stabilized completely and quietly floated under Luo Fan's feet, as if the terrifying struggle had never happened. It's finally done. Luo Fan breathed a sigh of relief. At this moment, the void began to shake violently. Cracks appeared in the void, and the densely packed cracks spread to every corner of the void, turning the entire space into a three-dimensional space wrapped in a spider web. After these cracks appeared, it grew bigger and bigger. The entire void was about to be completely torn apart and destroyed. Even ordinary people could tell that without the level 8 pseudo-sage treasure as the core to suppress the so-called seamless domain, this void was about to collapse. Such a change was naturally not fatal to Luo Fan. But if he couldn't leave before it collapsed, he was afraid that he would be thrown into another space-time that he was completely unfamiliar with, or in the demon realm. It was also possible that he would be far away from his original position due to the changes in space-time. Obviously, this was also a type of trouble. Therefore, Luo Fan did not hesitate. He put away the heavenly cauldron, raised his hand, and grabbed the panicking pet. He held the cultivation wisdom in one hand and took a step forward. He left the void and arrived at the fog that he had entered in the beginning. This fog was also full of cracks at this moment, as if it was about to collapse and be destroyed. Obviously, this was not a safe place. Luo Fan took another step and appeared in front of a small mountain on a small island in the demon realm. There was a loud bang. The small mountain suddenly collapsed out of thin air, completely turning into smoke and dust. With a gentle breeze, the smoke and dust rose into the sky, blowing into the distance and gradually dissipating without a trace, leaving only a deep pit that was hundreds of miles deep. This deep pit had obviously touched a certain underground water layer. At this moment, countless streams of water flowed in from all directions and began to quickly fill the deep pit, turning it into an increasingly obvious lake. Because it was hundreds of miles deep, even if the water flowed in so quickly, it could not fill the pit in a short period of time. It would take at least a few days. How could you have such a powerful magic treasure? The cultivation wisdom began to shout at this moment. Magic treasures are refined to be used by people. In that case, why can't I have such a powerful magic treasure? Luo Fan said faintly. Such an answer with countless flaws made cultivation wisdom momentarily unable to find a single fatal point to refute. From this aspect, this answer could be considered a perfect one. So a true powerhouse is so powerful. I'm still too far away. At this moment, the tortoise that acted as Luo Fan's pet in that space sighed with emotion. For a bodiless immortal like him, any of the methods Luo Fan used just now, no matter how small they were, was something he didn't dare to imagine. Even if he completely destroyed all of his flesh and blood, he absolutely couldn't do it. This kind of stimulation once again reminded him of the story of how Luo Fan's aura completely collapsed the island that he was born on. He had a clearer understanding of his own weakness. Naturally, Luo Fan did not care about him. With a thought, he lifted his foot and stepped forward lightly. Without any fluctuation or abnormality, He had already arrived at the inn in the golden border city of the Qing nation and sat down on the seat that he had been sitting on. Although he had appeared out of thin air and there were many guests in the inn, no ordinary person felt anything about Luo Fan appearing out of thin air. It was as if Luo Fan had always been there and had never left. This was also the result of the surrounding space naturally distorting the vision and memories of the surrounding creatures. After sitting down, Luo Fan reached into his sleeve and searched a few times. A small cylinder, as thick as a finger and as long as a chopstick, appeared in his hand. "Let me go. Let me go. I'm a primordial treasure. How dare you be so disrespectful to me? You're doomed. You're dead." As soon as the cylinder appeared, an exasperated voice came from it. "If you speak rudely again, I'll erase your spiritual intelligence," Luo Fan said lightly. "You can't do it. I'm a primordial treasure. Spiritual intelligence is natural. Unless you're a sage. Otherwise, no one will be able to erase my intelligence." A small, scaly face appeared on the cylinder, and it said proudly, "Only a sage can erase your spiritual intelligence." Luo Fan frowned. It was only a level 8 pseudo-sage treasure. Perhaps only a sage could erase its spiritual intelligence? He obviously didn't quite believe it. Since he did not believe it, he might as well give a try. With his strength as a level 4 pseudo-sage, it would be impossible to erase the spiritual intelligence of a level 8 pseudo-sage treasure unless he had completely refined it. Moreover, this magic treasure was not an ordinary level 8 pseudo-sage treasure. Therefore, what he could rely on was the power of the Divine Court Heavenly Cauldron. Revealing the power of the Divine Court Heavenly Cauldron might attract the attention of people with ulterior motives. It might cause trouble, so Luo Fan did not plan to do so. He directly stuffed the cylinder into the universe in his sleeve. He threw it directly into the Divine Court Heavenly Cauldron, then mobilized the power of the Divine Court Heavenly Cauldron and slowly poured it into the cylinder. The cylinder seemed to be a physical object, but it was actually formed by countless small and dense worlds intertwined. The moment the power was poured into it, Luo Fan felt that he had passed through a minor kiliocosm, a medium kiliocosm, and a major kiliocosm, one after another. These worlds were like the molecules and atoms in an ordinary cylinder, stacked and combined together. This made the cylinder seem like a real physical object. Through the power of the level 9 pseudo-sage treasure, Luo Fan obtained tens of thousands of times more information than if he had sensed the magic treasure himself. The relationship between the countless worlds, the various properties of the countless worlds, and even the spiritual intelligence of the level 8 pseudo-sage treasure were instantly established in his mind. "I see. It's the spiritual origin of all the living beings in all the worlds that make up your spiritual intelligence. No wonder you dare to say such bold words." Luo Fan smiled slightly. It's good that you know. As long as these worlds exist, my spiritual intelligence will definitely exist. If you completely destroy these worlds, my spiritual intelligence will definitely exist. Then, my body will completely disappear. Therefore, unless you give up on me, you won't be able to pose any threat to my spiritual intelligence. If you know what's good for you, hurry up and worship me." The spiritual intelligence of the level 8 pseudo-sage treasure said. In the face of such a threat, Luo Fan knew that what it said was basically right. The spiritual origin of all the living beings in a world was an existence that was derived at the same time as the world, but it was not related to the living beings that existed in that world. As long as the world existed, the spiritual origin would exist. It would not change because of how one destroyed the living beings in that world, nor would it change because of how many times the living beings in that world had reincarnated. It was obviously almost impossible to erase the spiritual origin of the countless worlds as his core spiritual intelligence. However, although he could not erase it completely, it did not mean that Luo Fan could not deal with it. "I see. How should I put it? I'll completely separate these worlds for a period of time. It shouldn't affect you much, right?" Luo Fan smiled faintly. as he said that he controlled the power of the divine court heavenly cauldron and directly cut into the countless worlds and the magic treasure, forming a layer of barrier between the countless worlds and completely separating them from the other worlds. This made the countless worlds that were originally piled up and connected become independent from each other. This process was not completed in one go by Luo Fan. Instead, he slowly moved down from the top of the cylinder and cut off the connection between those worlds bit by bit. When the connection between the worlds was cut off, the connection between the spiritual origin of the worlds was naturally cut off as well. For the spiritual intelligence, this was simply like cutting off its spiritual intelligence. To put more tragically, it was equivalent to an ordinary person completely cutting off the connection between their brain cells. That kind of pain was naturally imaginable. Even though such an action would not affect the foundation of the spiritual intelligence and would not make it disappear completely, it would bring endless pain to the spiritual intelligence and affect its ability to think. At this moment, the spiritual intelligence only knew how to scream continuously. The shrill and tragic cries kept coming out of Luo Fan's sleeves, causing the surrounding spiritual intelligence and Luo Fan's pets to fall silent. Stop! Stop! I give up! I give up! After screaming for a while, the level 8 pseudo-sage treasure finally cried out. Hearing this, Luo Fan did not stop immediately. Instead, he continued to pour the power of the divine court heavenly cauldron into the level 8 pseudo-sage treasure and continued to cut off the world inside the level 8 pseudo-sage treasure. Hey, I've already given up. What else do you want? The level 8 pseudo-sage treasure was about to cry at this moment. Chapter 1362. After tossing and turning the level 8 pseudo-sage treasure for a while, Luo Fan stopped and took out the cylinder again. At this time, the treasure had truly become obedient. Luo Fan placed it on the table, and it stood there obediently, not daring to move at all. When did you come to this universe? Luo Fan asked calmly. About 3 quadrillion years ago. How did you get here? Luo Fan frowned and continued to ask. I don't know about that. Back then, I was living well in the mystic yang world, but one day I was captured by an irresistible force. In the blink of an eye, I had already left the mystic yang world and arrived in this strange world. The level 8 pseudo-holy treasure's voice was mixed with inexplicable doubt. Irresistible force? You were already a level 8 pseudo-holy treasure back then? Luo Fan frowned. He originally thought he could get more information, but it seemed like he was overthinking it. No, I was only a level 7 pseudo-holy back then. Compared to now, I'm still far from it. 3 trillion years, no one refined you, and you actually advanced from a level 7 pseudo-holy to a level 8 pseudo-holy. Luo Fan was shocked and asked, I'm a Khanate cardinal treasure after all. This speed is already considered slow. If it wasn't for the fact that this world is completely unfamiliar and the Tao is completely different, I could have grown to a level 9 pseudo-holy in this period of time. The level 8 pseudo-holy treasure's voice was mixed with a hint of pride. However, it soon thought of its current situation, and the hint of pride disappeared without a trace in the blink of an eye. Then the person who brought you to this universe must have something for you to do. What is it? I think you want me to help him nurture his descendants. However, this is only the beginning of a few trillion years. After a few trillion years, all the descendants I know will disappear without a trace, and no one will care about me anymore. Nurture descendants? Luo Fan's eyes lit up when he heard this. He didn't expect to get such a surprise when he originally just wanted to hear some news about the mystic yang world. He didn't ask anymore and said directly, Open up your memories and let me see for myself. Such a request. It was extremely impolite. For any level 8 pseudo-sage, even if it was a magic treasure, it was extremely impolite. However, after the level 8 pseudo-sage treasure was tossed around by Luo Fan for such a long time, it was completely destroyed. However, he no longer dared to refute Luo Fan. Although he was extremely dissatisfied and unwilling, he did not dare to say anything. Aggrieved, She opened up her memories in front of Luo Fan. Luo Fan naturally would not stand on ceremony. His will directly cut into the memories of the level 8 pseudo-sage, and endless light and shadows flashed in front of him. Under his will, they were automatically categorized and arranged into a river of memories that had been passed down from ancient times to the present. How many memories there were in 3 quadrillion years could be roughly calculated from how many memories a person had in their lifetime. You should know, normally, an ordinary person's lifespan was only 70 to 80 years. However, even in such a situation, the memories accumulated in an ordinary person's lifetime. It was enough to cause other people who were unprepared to receive these memories to develop schizophrenia. One could imagine how terrifying the memories of 3 quadrillion years were. However, this was nothing to Luo Fan at all. No matter how many memories there were, how could they compare to all the information he had experienced on the path of transcendence and the projection of that era? In a trance, Luo Fan felt as though he had become a cylindrical magic treasure. Over the course of 3 trillion years, he had been constantly searching for some ordinary creatures with aptitudes to nurture. He watched as these ordinary creatures grew up one by one, grew stronger one by one, and eventually died one by one. In such a repetitive process, he continued the fate that he had been destined to since he was born. Between these cycles, Luo Fan went back to the source and gradually traced back the memories he had when he first came to this universe. He searched for what the creatures that brought him to this universe looked like and what kind of wonders they had. There are just too many memories. Even Luo Fan had to spend several days to skip over the 3 quadrillion years of memories and trace back to the beginning, to the first batch of creatures that he had cultivated after coming to this universe. These creatures were exactly what Luo Fan's pet tortoise looked like after it took human form. When they first entered the small chiliocosm created by the magic treasure, they were not much different from ordinary creatures. They didn't have the ability to ignore the dangers created by the magic treasure. Under the arrangement of the magic treasure, they were constantly being tempered by danger and constantly absorbing the energy they needed. They received the training they needed, and their cultivation continued to increase. When they broke through the connate grand heavenly realm and reached the demisage realm, an irresistible force acted on the magic treasure. It suppressed the magic treasure and spat out the creatures, which were then taken away by that force. After those living beings left, another group of living beings would arrive not long after. Just like that, the previous process was repeated. It continued to nurture creatures and create various convenient conditions for them to grow. When these creatures grew strong enough, they would be suppressed and taken away again. This process lasted for trillions of years. At a certain moment, when the last batch of creatures grew strong enough and were taken away, everything became silent. The magic treasure could no longer sense any creatures entering its body. It could no longer continue the duty it was destined to do since it was born. It could no longer nurture batches of creatures like it did in the beginning. It was as if it had been completely forgotten. It waited for trillions of years. In the end, when the magic treasure was about to be demoted because no one was refining it and it could no longer nurture creatures to continue its duty, the magic treasure finally reacted and began to search for some creatures to nurture. However, because it had found these creatures on its own, it had never shown its true appearance. It only created all sorts of fortuitous encounters for them, allowing many creatures to continuously improve and grow because of these fortuitous encounters. Just like that, batch after batch of living beings grew up and left, allowing his duty to be put to use. In this process, it also obtained a rare tempering. Not only did its level stop declining, it gradually increased. After trillions of years, it finally broke through its limit. It entered the level 8 pseudo-sage realm. With such progress, it naturally became more proactive in searching for creatures that could help it fulfill its duty to nurture. Moreover, the range of its search for creatures kept expanding, and its location kept changing. He wanted to use this ability to push his level to break through to the level 9 pseudo-sage level. However, unfortunately, The difference between a level 8 pseudo-sage realm and a level 9 pseudo-sage realm was too great. Compared to the difference between a level 7 pseudo-sage realm and a level 8 pseudo-sage realm, it was more than 1,000 times greater. With its rate of improvement, it would take at least hundreds of trillions of years for it to truly become a level 9 pseudo-saint treasure. After Luo Fan roughly scanned through all the memories of this level 8 pseudo-sage treasure over the past 3 trillion years, he focused his attention on its experiences before it came to the Earth universe and during the period of time it had just arrived here. After carefully observing and searching, Luo Fan could not help but feel helpless. You're really naive. Apart from your duty, you don't care about anything at all. In the memories of the magic treasure, apart from nurturing people, there were no other memories at all. He even suspected that the entire process of the irresistible force that made this magic treasure leave the mysterious Yang world and come to the Earth universe was not because the owner of that force had hidden it well. It was because this magic treasure did not pay any attention to the owner of that force at all. It did not even bother to observe what the owner of that force looked like, or ask why the owner of that force wanted to capture it. Back then, I had always been refined by someone, so I didn't need to use my mind at all. My mind lacks training, so I'm indeed a bit naive, the level 8 pseudo-sage said with some grievance. However, after a long period of self-training, I'm countless times better now. Compared to before, it's indeed so. Luo Fan sighed. Back then, when you asked me to refine you in that seamless domain, was it because you wanted to create some world to nurture me? Luo Fan suddenly asked. Back then, the magic treasure directly opened up for him to refine. Although he felt that the situation was not right and refused to refine it directly, he had always been unaware of the negative consequences of refining it. He did not understand why this magic treasure would do that. Now that he looked at its memories, he had some guesses. Of course, as a primordial cardinal treasure, in addition to being refined by others, nurturing people is also an excellent way for me to improve my level. Moreover, the stronger the living being that I nurture, the more I can improve. If I can nurture you to become stronger, I will definitely be able to shorten the time needed to improve my level. The level 8 pseudo-sage treasure said proudly. How about it? Why don't you let me nurture you for hundreds of millions of years? In this way, you could get a lot of my resources and get the best growth. I can also take advantage of the opportunity to improve my level. This is definitely the best of both worlds. The level 8 pseudo-sage treasure shouted. When Luo Fan heard this, he frowned and said, "What ability do you have to nurture me? No matter what, I'm a level 8 pseudo-sage treasure. I should be able to find a way to nurture you." The level 8 pseudo-sage treasure said. For example, Luo Fan asked faintly. For example, I can create a vast thousand world, seal all your strength, and then throw you into it to create all the conditions for your success. I'll let you continue to grow along the path I've left for you. After hundreds of millions of years, it's almost certain that you will become a level 8 pseudo-sage. As it spoke, the level 8 pseudo-sage treasure became proud, and its voice became extremely fanatical. Seal my strength? I think you still want to seal my memory, Luo Fan said faintly. Seal your memory? Of course, that's a must. Your memory is also your strength. If your strength is sealed, how can you retain your memory? That kind of seal that retains memory is definitely an incomplete seal. The level 8 pseudo-sage treasure said matter-of-factly. When Luo Fan heard this, he was no longer in the mood to listen to it. He directly picked it up and stuffed it into his sleeve. He directly stuffed it into the sleeve universe and threw it directly into the heavenly cauldron of the divine court. The power of the heavenly cauldron of the divine court washed it from the inside to the outside. In an instant, the screams of the level 8 pseudo-sage treasure kept coming out of his sleeve. That sound was really sad and could make anyone who heard cry. After a while, only then did he take out the magic treasure and place it on the table. Did I say something wrong? The level 8 pseudo-sage treasure murmured at this time. Are you an idiot? How could he agree to have his strength and memory sealed by you? What if you have bad intentions? From this proposal, I can see that you have bad intentions and want to deceive him. And it's even a level 8 pseudo-sage treasure. Your intelligence is even lower than mine. At this time, the cultivation wisdom in Luo Fan's hand sneered. Why do I have bad intentions? This is a necessary process of cultivation. He is now a level 4 pseudo-sage, and his Tao is already unbreakable. If I don't seal his strength and memory, how can he walk on the Tao that I set? How can I let him grow smoothly? The level 8 pseudo-sage treasure cried out loudly. You're really stupid. It's too boring to quarrel with an idiot like you. The cultivation wisdom said regretfully. Hey, speak clearly. How am I stupid? The level 8 pseudo-sage treasure said angrily. The cultivation wisdom said that it would not say anything. Naturally, it would not say anything. No matter how much the level 8 pseudo-sage treasure made a fuss, it did not say anything. Finally, it was Luo Fan's pet turtle who interrupted. Senior, since Master's Tao is already unbreakable, how could he be willing to destroy his own Tao and walk on the Tao that you left behind? The level 8 pseudo-sage treasure heard this. Finally, it fell silent. After a while, it said with some boredom, no wonder every time they reach the Sage-to-Be realm, they never come back. It turns out that they have found their own Tao and are no longer willing to walk on the Tao that I set. There was a sudden realization in its voice, but more than that, there was a kind of indescribable sadness. It was a kind of indescribable sorrow, a kind of sorrow as if he finally knew why his children had left his parents. During this process, Luo Fan did not pay attention to the conversation between the level 8 pseudo-sage treasure and the cultivation wisdom, as well as his pet turtle. Instead, it was as if he was carefully observing the memory of the level 8 pseudo-sage treasure and the living creatures that it had cultivated in Xinyang world. As a congenital magic treasure that had the duty of cultivating living creatures, the ability of this magic treasure to cultivate living creatures was really superb. If it was regarded as a teacher, it was definitely the most perfect teacher that Luo Fan had seen in countless worlds. Looking at the many adventures and guidance that it had arranged for those living creatures, Luo Fan often secretly praised it. That kind of absolute targeting, that kind of adjustment that was made completely according to the personality of the living creatures, was enough to perfectly guide the living creatures to the direction that it wanted, and finally let the living creatures exert their strongest potential and obtain the greatest growth. Among them, there were even countless methods that Luo Fan could not think of. After carefully studying for a while, he suddenly felt that his grasp of the minds of the living creatures had actually increased a little. This kind of rare progress was beyond his expectations. Through such research, Luo Fan's understanding of the living creatures in Xinyang world gradually deepened. The level 8 pseudo-sage treasure could not analyze other things from the process of cultivating living creatures, but it was not a problem for Luo Fan at all. Through the changes in the groups of living creatures cultivated by this magic treasure after entering the Earth's universe, he speculated that when those living creatures had just entered the Earth's universe, they must have been experiencing an extremely tragic war. The tragic degree of the war even forced the cultivators of Xinyang world to increase the cultivation of their descendants, and they had to cultivate as many warriors as possible as soon as possible. These could be guessed from the number of living creatures that had entered this magic treasure. The types of living creatures that had entered the magic treasure could also prove this point. Who are they fighting with? Why are they fighting? To be able to so easily subdue a level 7 pseudo-sage treasure and bring it to another perfect world, it should at least be in existence of the level 8 pseudo-sage level. Looking at the types of living creatures, the number of living creatures that had entered the Earth's universe from Xinyang world was at least over 1,000. This could definitely be considered a large-scale invasion. What is their purpose? Luo Fan pondered. After obtaining some answers, he discovered that there were even more questions that he had encountered. From Luo Fan's point of view, as a perfect world that was about to become a great world, it suddenly sent a large number of powerhouses to invade another perfect world. No matter how he looked at it, It could only be to welcome the great calamity of the world, and try to survive the great calamity of the world, to promote the world to the level of a great world. However, how could they achieve this effect by doing this? How could invading a perfect world that was countless miles away, or even completely unconnected, be of any help to that perfect world? How could they obtain the power to resist the great calamity of the perfect world? Chapter 1363. On this day, Luo Fan was reading various books collected by Cultivation Wisdom in the inn. Suddenly, a ray of light descended from the sky and appeared at the entrance of the inn. It was an extremely beautiful woman. The woman had a well-proportioned figure and a beautiful face. Just by standing there, her surroundings became much brighter, dazzling many mortals in the surroundings and making them unable to look away. This woman was a level 1 pseudo-sage cultivator. After she appeared, she bowed at the entrance and said softly, "I am a disciple of the spiritual water palace. Under the orders of the palace master, I have come to invite Senior to the spiritual water palace to participate in the enthronement ceremony of the next palace master. I hope that Senior will not hesitate to come." Although the voice was not loud, its penetrative power was beyond imagination. It directly entered the interior of the inn and slowly echoed in Luo Fan's ears. Hearing this voice, Luo Fan could not help but frown. What kind of sect was this spiritual water palace? He had never heard of it. However, although the news of him being here was not completely hidden, it was not something that ordinary cultivators could discover. In particular, it was not a cultivator from this island. To be able to discover his existence and accurately deliver the invitation to him, it was obvious that this was not an ordinary cultivator. "I have never heard of the spiritual water palace," Luo Fan said calmly. Hearing Luo Fan's words, the woman's expression changed slightly. To her, the spiritual water palace was her home and held an extremely high status. Under such circumstances, how could Luo Fan's words that were close to contempt or provocation enter her ears? Although Senior's cultivation is profound, if you disrespect the spiritual water palace, I will risk my life. I will definitely seek justice for me," the woman said sternly. Hearing this, Luo Fan found it interesting. He raised his hand and waved gently. That woman felt as though she was being used by an indescribable invisible force. Her figure trembled, and she directly passed through the void. From outside the inn, she directly entered the inn and appeared beside the table where Luo Fan was sitting. "I have never heard of the spiritual water palace." Was this contempt? "Your spirit water true palace thinks too highly of yourselves. The world is so vast. You might not even be able to recognize all the disciples of the 54 sages. No matter how famous the spiritual water true palace is, can it compare to the disciples of the sages?" Luo Fan said calmly. His words caused the woman's emotions to surge and her expression to change. She even involuntarily ignored the fact that she had suddenly been pulled into the guest battle. The spirit water true palace is indeed incomparable to the sages. But in this sea region, our spirit water true palace controls almost everything. Anyone who dares to step into this sea region has never said that they don't know about the spirit water true palace. The woman's eyes shone with pride and anger as she spoke. "So, this ocean region belongs to the spirit water true palace. Looks like I've been ignorant all these years." Luo Fan revealed a faint smile. His words caused the woman's expression to change even more. This was something that he could not admit. Although these words were only slightly different from what she had said before, but, in essence, there was already a world of difference. In fact, every ocean region in the entire demon realm. Actually, every ocean region in the entire demon realm had a master. That was one of the sages on the 4 central continents. The obvious proof of this conclusion was that when every island was completely unified, it would naturally trigger a test from one of the sages. Those who passed the test would naturally be led to the sage's subordinates and participate in the conflict between the sages. There were conflicts between the sages, so the sages on each island would be tested. Since that was the case, the entire demon realm's boundless ocean region could only be divided into regions and owned by the sages. Therefore, it was naturally possible for the woman to say that the Spirit Water True Palace controlled almost everything in this ocean region. For example, a piece of land belonged to a farm owner, but the construction engineer of the land could claim that he controlled almost everything on the land. However, if the construction engineer dared to say that the land belonged to him, he would be sued. Similarly, if the woman dared to admit that this ocean region belonged to the Spirit Water True Palace, perhaps the sages who owned this ocean region would not argue with her. However, if they did, what awaited the Spirit Water True Palace would be a disaster. The woman obviously did not dare to take such a risk just because of a sentence. Therefore, the woman did not say a word after hearing this. Her expression was extremely ugly. "Where's the invitation?" Luo Fan chuckled. He did not continue the topic and extended his hand. The woman wanted to turn around and leave, but she remembered her mission. She had no choice but to take out an invitation carved from green jade from her storage space and hand it to Luo Fan. Luo Fan's expression changed slightly as he took the invitation. The essence of this invitation was not too high. At most, it could only be considered an ordinary magic weapon. What caused his expression to change greatly was that the invitation contained an indescribable aura. It was the aura of a level 9 pseudo-sage. This aura was faintly discernible. It seemed to exist, but not exist at the same time. It appeared in a way that Luo Fan could sense, but it did not affect the surroundings at all. With this aura, it was enough to show that the person who sent the invitation was at least a level 9 pseudo-sage. Although he understood this, he did not dare to be careless. When he carefully opened the invitation, he saw that the invitation was densely packed with some rather gorgeous words. There were thousands of words written beautifully and sincerely. The general content was that the enthronement ceremony of the new palace master of the Spirit Water True Palace would be held on a certain day in 3 years, and the fellow cultivators who received this invitation were invited to attend. At that time, there would be important matters concerning the safety of the world to be discussed. Important matters concerning the safety of the world? That's a bit too much. Since it's so important, why didn't you report it to the sages? Luo Fan frowned. He did not like the style of the invitation, especially the last part about the important matters concerning the safety of the world. This kind of words made people feel like they were putting a big hat on him. You must come. If you don't come, you don't even care about the safety of the world. You don't have the right to live in this world. This kind of words made him feel that the invitation was threatening him. Obviously, he was quite displeased. The sages are supreme beings. Everything is arranged by them. All we can do is to try our best to prevent anything dangerous from happening. That's right. This must be arranged by the sages, the woman said very firmly. Another superstitious person. Luo Fan sighed inwardly. Of course, he obviously could not say this at this time. If he said it, he would not be provoking the woman, but provoking the sages. Of course, he did not say it out loud, nor did he agree with it. He just sneered and said, "I'll see if I'm interested when the time comes." Why are you so ignorant of the general interest? Luo Fan's expression made the woman very dissatisfied. However, this made the woman very dissatisfied, and her expression became extremely ugly. I sent dozens of invitations, and every person who received them understood the gravity of the situation and clearly expressed that they would definitely attend the event. How could you ignore it like this? What an arrogant cultivator. You're a disgrace to the world. Hearing this, Luo Fan could not help but laugh. First of all, they agreed. It's not because they understood the general interest, but because they were afraid of the spiritual water palace and had to agree. Secondly, the so-called safety of the world is just your Spirit Water True Palace's own words. What is the real situation? Is there some conspiracy in your Spirit Water True Palace? Is it because you want to gather all the cultivators together for something? Or is it because you're afraid that no one will come to the enthronement ceremony of the new palace master? Is it because you're afraid that no one will come to the ceremony? None of these are certain. You wanted to be transferred to the spiritual water palace with just a few words? Are you sure this is not a joke? He said with a faint smile. His words made the woman's expression suddenly stiffen. As a disciple of the spiritual water palace, everything had been smooth sailing for her since she started cultivating. This time, when she sent out the invitations, everyone who received the invitations was flattered. They treated her with respect, almost like mortals greeting immortals. This experience made her involuntarily feel that anyone who received this invitation should be flattered. Anyone who read the words on the invitation should treat it as the truth and completely trust everything written on it. At this time, after receiving Luo Fan's analysis, she just realized how wishful thinking this idea was. After all, she was a level 1 pseudo-saint. Although she had been hurt by Luo Fan's words many times just now, she still retained enough rationality. After discovering that her thoughts were wishful thinking, she did not immediately fly into a rage out of humiliation. Instead, she put herself in the shoes of other people who had never heard of the Spirit Water True Palace when they received this invitation. Thinking of this, she broke out in a cold sweat. This was because she realized that if she were in Luo Fan's position, she might not have behaved as kindly as Luo Fan. Most likely, he would turn around and leave without even seeing her. He wouldn't even have the chance to listen to her. Even if he reluctantly looked at the invitation, he would definitely not agree to it right away. It was even more likely that he would directly throw the invitation away, completely ignoring the contents of the invitation. After thinking about this, the woman's face turned slightly red. Luo Fan did not carefully try to figure out what the woman was thinking. After saying that, he said indifferently, "That's it then. I'll see how I'm feeling. If I'm in a good mood, perhaps I'll attend the so-called enthronement ceremony. If I'm not in a good mood, I can only apologize in advance." "Yes, Senior, please go ahead," the woman said softly. Luo Fan could not react to this. This change seemed to be too fast. He finally looked at the woman and realized that she was blushing. Her eyes were filled with shame and uneasiness. His mind raced when he saw the woman's reaction, and he quickly realized what was going on. All of a sudden, he had a much better impression of the woman than before. "You're not bad. How should I address you?" "I'm Chineen," the woman said carefully. "Chineen, that's a good name. What's your status in the Spirit Water True Palace? You're a pseudo-saint after all, so you should have some status, right?" Luo Fan asked with a smile. "Well, Senior, you've guessed correctly. I'm just an ordinary true disciple in the Spirit Water True Palace. I really don't have any status," Chineen said, looking a little ashamed. Luo Fan was shocked. How is that possible? Even if you're a disciple of a sage, a level 1 pseudo-saint would definitely have some status, right? Your Spirit Water True Palace is clearly inferior to the disciples of a sage. How can you be an ordinary true disciple? Unless your Spirit Water True Palace is deliberately showing off your strength by sending out invitations this time around, demoting some people with status to ordinary true disciples. Surely that's not necessary? No. Chin-in hurriedly waved her hands, looking a little panicked. She was clearly worried that Luo Fan had misunderstood the Spirit Water True Palace. Then why? Luo Fan frowned. Actually, I was originally an elder of the Spirit Water True Palace. I was demoted to a true disciple because I made some mistakes, the woman said shamefully. Obviously, she was feeling extremely ashamed and embarrassed for the mistake she had made in fading away. Luo Fan frowned. "I can't be sure that they didn't purposely find fault with you and demote you for the sake of the Spirit Water True Palace's reputation. About that, I don't know. I don't think that's the case. After all, there were some disciples who had sent invitations, but they were only ordinary true disciples. They're just quasi-sage cultivators," the zither said. Luo Fan only laughed. "All right, it doesn't matter if it is or not. It has nothing to do with me." What is the important matter regarding the safety of the world mentioned in the invitations? Do you know anything about it?" The woman's eyes lit up. Luo Fan's words. It was obvious that he wanted to attend the enthronement ceremony. Although this wouldn't do her much good, it meant that her mission of sending invitations would become even more perfect. She was naturally quite happy about this. She hurriedly explained, Although I don't know the specifics, I know that it's definitely true. Our palace lord is a level 9 false sage. Tens of thousands of years ago, he was severely injured for some reason, and his strength was greatly reduced. He had to recuperate for tens of thousands of years. He only came out of seclusion recently. After he came out, he immediately asked the next palace lord, who would take tens of thousands of years to ascend the throne, to prepare for the enthronement and send invitations everywhere. This is enough to show that the important matter regarding the safety of the world is definitely true. It's also very likely that it was that important matter that injured our palace lord. When Luo Fan heard this, he shook his head and said, "I don't think so. You put it this way. I'm more and more suspicious that your palace lord is plotting something." After being injured for tens of thousands of years, he suddenly came out of seclusion and said that he wants the next palace lord to ascend the throne. He also invited many cultivators that he doesn't even know to attend the enthronement ceremony. If he hasn't fully recovered from his injuries, I wouldn't be surprised at all if he invited so many cultivators to devour them to recover from his injuries. With that, he smiled. He patted the cultivation wisdom in his hand and said, "Tell me, how many kinds of divine abilities do you have to devour cultivators to recover from injuries?" That cultivation wisdom said in a very amusing manner, 37,213 types. In fact, the principle of devouring other cultivators to recover from injuries isn't that difficult. The difficult part is how to suppress the hidden dangers to the minimum. If we ignore the hidden dangers, the number could be increased by more than 10,000 times. Impossible. Our palace lord would never do that. Qin Yin yelled at this moment. Her face was flushed, and her eyes were filled with intense anger. She was obviously extremely angry at Luo Fan for speculating about their palace lord in such a way. In fact, she had even completely suppressed the slight favorable impression she had of Luo Fan. Luo Fan chuckled and said, "I'm just deducing it based on common sense. Do you need to be so agitated? What common sense is that? Our spiritual water true palace has a great reputation. How could we do such a thing?" Qinin clearly did not accept Luo Fan's explanation. In fact, Luo Fan did not think that such a thing would happen either. He was just casually saying it just to refute the woman's statement. However, there was one thing that he wasn't spouting nonsense. What the woman said was indeed not enough to prove that something related to the safety of the entire world had happened. The most likely possibility was that the palace lord of the spiritual water true palace had encountered a problem that she could not solve on her own and had to rely on the strength of other cultivators to solve this problem. The process of solving this problem might be extremely dangerous, so he had no choice but to pass on the position of the palace lord, perhaps. Luo Fan only smiled at the woman's words and did not say anything else. Qinin was no longer willing to talk to the senior in front of her. She endured the anger in her heart and bowed to Luo Fan. After bidding farewell, she turned around and turned into a streak of light that soared into the sky. She hurriedly left the island. How did she become a pseudo-sage with such a weak mental endurance? Luo Fan could not help but shake his head as he watched the woman leave in a hurry. Do you think everyone is like you? This is how a level 1 pseudo-sage should behave. The cultivation wisdom said disdainfully. Is that so? It seems like the sect is responsible for her success and failure. Luo Fan smiled faintly as he knew what he had overlooked after hearing the cultivation wisdom's words. Chapter 1364. 3 years passed in the blink of an eye. Unknowingly, Luo Fan felt that he had adapted to life in the mortal Golden Border City. Even Luo Fan could not count how many books were produced in the mortal world every day. Moreover, the range of books that the cultivation wisdom could collect continued to expand as time passed. At first, it could only collect books from the Great Qing Nation where Luo Fan was from. However, after 3 years, all the books on the entire island had become its property. There were tens of thousands of countries on the island, and each country had thousands or even tens of thousands of cities like Golden Border City. The number of books that were produced at every moment was at least in the tens of thousands. Over the past 3 years, although Luo Fan read at an extremely fast speed, The number of books that the cultivation wisdom had accumulated was still many times more than before. An ordinary person would not be able to read 1/10 of these books, even if they read them for tens of thousands of years without rest. Of course, not all of these books were good books. Some of them were gibberish that could not be understood. However, for Luo Fan, those books were nothing more than a glance. On this day, Luo Fan closed his book, which was a rare occurrence. He was playing with a little girl who often came to the inn to play. Suddenly, a ray of light descended from the sky. Then, an aura that he had sensed before appeared at the entrance of the inn. As soon as Luo Fan sensed the aura, he immediately knew who it was. He could not help but smile. He said to the little girl, "Uncle has something to do now. Can you go and play first?" "Oh, goodbye, Uncle," the little girl said obediently. Then, she ran out of the inn while hugging the snacks that Luo Fan gave her. Melody pays her respects to Senior. At this moment, the person who arrived suddenly greeted at the entrance. Luo Fan smiled and said, "It's nice to see an acquaintance again after 3 years. Come in. Why are you being so pretentious outside?" "Yes," Luo Fan replied calmly. Luo Fan knew that she had come prepared. She probably came prepared. Very soon, Qinin walked in gracefully and came to the seat where Luo Fan was sitting. She bowed slightly and said, "Greetings, Senior. I'm here this time. Don't tell me you're here to deliver an invitation again." Luo Fan laughed. "Not at all. This time, I'm here to persuade you to attend my enthronement ceremony," Qin said sternly. "Oh, you came prepared. Tell me about it. How are you going to convince me?" Luo Fan had already guessed this, so he wasn't surprised at this time. "Back then, you said that you couldn't be sure what the palace lord was plotting, which was why you invited so many cultivators to the true Spirit Water Palace. This time, I have evidence to prove that the palace lord was indeed invited to discuss matters concerning the safety of the world." The Guqin sound said, "Evidence? Is there any evidence for this? Then take it out and let me have a look." Luo Fan closed cultivation wisdom and said faintly. He was indeed a little curious about what Qin was going to say to convince him, or what else would she take out to convince him of the sincerity of the true Spirit Water Palace. Qin was obviously a little dissatisfied with Luo Fan's nonchalant attitude. However, she seemed to be mentally prepared. She just gritted her teeth and didn't show any other signs of displeasure. With a wave of her hand, she took out a strange item from the storage space she had opened up. The item looked like a pebble. It looked so ordinary, as if it was picked up from the bank of an ordinary river. It would be very normal for such a pebble to appear in the hands of ordinary mortals. However, when it appeared in the hands of a level 1 pseudo-saint, it seemed very out of place. Luo Fan raised his hand and waved gently, and the pebble fell into his hand. He gently caressed the pebble, and it felt extremely warm to the touch, like a piece of beautiful jade. Compared to its ordinary appearance, there was a world of difference, and they were two extremes. Luo Fan frowned, and his senses slowly seeped into the pebble. The inside of the pebble didn't seem much different from its appearance. It was also like an ordinary pebble, except that its structure was a little special, and it was more similar to a piece of beautiful jade. In other words, Luo Fan couldn't see anything unusual about the pebble at this moment. Luo Fan frowned and carefully sensed every detail on this cobblestone. From the inside to the outside, he carefully searched for any possible abnormalities in its interior. After a while, he suddenly frowned because he discovered something that he had been neglecting. This cobblestone was indeed an extremely ordinary cobblestone. No matter how carefully one analyzed it, it was just an ordinary cobblestone. However, there were traces left behind by a strange grand Tao within it. The Great Tao was generally similar to the Great Tao of the Devil Realm, but there was an extremely strange feeling in it. It was as if the Great Tao of the Devil Realm had been distorted by some strange mechanism. "This pebble isn't from this world." Luo Fan frowned. At that instant, a trace of admiration flashed in Qin Yin's eyes. However, it was quickly drowned out as she completely concealed it. She said, "That's right. I reported your suspicions back then, and the palace master gave me this item. If you're smart enough to see through this item, you'll definitely know that he wasn't lying. What great technique. Not only did it prove itself, but it also tested my knowledge, Luo Fan couldn't help but exclaim. Then, would you like to go to the spiritual water palace with me now? It's almost time for the enthronement ceremony. Chineen was overjoyed when she heard that. Your palace master has personally proven it. If I don't go, I'll offend someone. Fine, I'll go with you. Luo Fan sighed. Luo Fan agreed to participate in the enthronement ceremony of the spiritual water palace, not because he would offend someone if he didn't participate. If he wasn't sure that he would be absolutely safe, he would offend a sage. He wouldn't hesitate at all. The reason why he agreed to go was because of what he sensed in the pebble just now. The traces of the great Tao left in the pebble just now showed that the pebble didn't contain the great Tao of the devil realm. Moreover, it wasn't the great Tao of the devil realm, nor was it the great Tao of the other worlds in the Earth's universe. It was a great Tao that had nothing to do with the Earth's universe. Upon discovering this, Luo Fan instinctively thought of a name, Profound Yang Heaven and Earth. All these years, he had encountered many things related to profound Yang Heaven and Earth, so he was already extremely curious about it. At that moment, he suddenly discovered that other things related to profound Yang Heaven and Earth had appeared. Naturally, he had the thought of participating in it. Qin Yin was unaware of this. She was overjoyed when she heard that Lu Fuan had agreed. The smile on her face almost melted the entire inn. She smiled and said, "That's great. Let's get started now. I'll lead the way for senior." Luo Fan chuckled. He put the pet tortoise into his universe in his sleeve. He held the book in his hand. He stood up with his hands behind his back and said, "What are we waiting for?" As he spoke, he took a light step forward and arrived in midair. A magic cloud appeared under his feet. Such behavior was obviously the behavior of an immortal to mortals. This was because this time, Luo Fan didn't intend to hide it from the people in the city. Therefore, everyone in the city saw the abnormality here. For a moment, almost everyone spontaneously kowtowed in the direction of Luo Fan, muttering the thought of asking Luo Fan to bless them. Senior, aren't you going to live in seclusion here? Why did you leave in such a high-profile manner? If that's the case, I'm afraid I can't stay here anymore. Qinin came to Luo Fan's side. She was surprised to see this. Luo Fan said with a smile, "I'm going to participate in something that concerns the safety of the world. I don't even know if I'll lose my life there. How can I come back here to live in seclusion? It's impossible for me to come back after I leave this time. In that case, I might as well leave some traces of immortals here. It could be considered as leaving something behind for this city that I've lived in for hundreds of years." "Senior, you're so righteous," Qinin said, feeling a little ashamed. She suddenly felt a little guilty after hearing Luo Fan's words. It turned out that she had always wanted Luo Fan to participate in this matter, but she didn't think about anything else. She finally understood that Luo Fan's participation in this matter was good news for the spiritual Water True Palace. It would allow them to carry out their plan more smoothly. However, for Luo Fan, it was clearly dragging him into a dangerous situation where he didn't know whether he would survive or not. Regardless of whether he lived or died, he would never be able to return to this peaceful life he was living right now. After understanding this, she naturally felt an inexplicable sense of guilt. She felt as if she had caused Luo Fan to fall into such a predicament. Luo Fan naturally didn't care about what Qin Yin was thinking. After asking for directions, he drove the magic cloud to fly into the distance. The magic cloud left a long trace in the void that lingered for a long time. Such a change made the people in Gold City even more convinced that it was the behavior of an immortal. They immediately kowtowed even more sincerely. As if stimulated by Luo Fan's action of flying in the sky, the distorted memories of the natural changes of the world gradually recovered. For a time, the abnormality of the inn that Luo Fan had lived in for hundreds of years was discovered by more and more people. The mysteriousness of the inn began to spread. Because of this, Gold City also had a place where immortals resided. It began to become famous in Daqing Kingdom and gradually became a famous tourist spot in Gold City. Countless people came to get a bit of immortal chi and became famous. This made Gold City more and more prosperous. In the end, it even surpassed the capital of Daqing Kingdom. Decades later, after the emperor of Daqing Kingdom abdicated, he even came to live in the inn where Luo Fan lived in seclusion. From then on, this inn became the residence of the retired emperor and became a permanent rule. From this point, it could be said that the change in behavior that Luo Fan made before he left had indeed brought great benefits to Gold City. It made all the people in Gold City remember his existence forever. They remembered that there was once an immortal who lived in seclusion in this city for a very long time and brought endless fortune to this city. These things were naturally in the future. There was no need to talk about them. At this moment, under the guidance of Zither Sound, Luo Fan headed to the True Spirit Water Palace at an unimaginable speed. "What is the name of your palace master?" Luo Fan asked along the way. His question made Zither Sound try to provoke him again. Suddenly, she felt that her previous guilt towards Luo Fan was simply overthinking things. The True Spirit Water Palace controlled this sea region and could be considered the overlord of this sea region. Anyone would know the name of the palace master of the True Spirit Water Palace if they asked around a little. However, it would have been fine if this person had not known 3 years ago. After 3 years, he knew that the True Spirit Water Palace had invited him to participate in the enthronement ceremony of the new palace master. Yet, he did not ask about the situation of the True Spirit Water Palace. This was simply not putting the Spirit Water True Palace in their eyes. It would be strange if Zither Sound was not angry when she heard this. Yuan Venerate. My palace master's name is Yuan Venerate. Zither Sound's voice sounded as if she was speaking through her teeth. Yuan Venerate. You are indeed a supreme, level 9, pseudo-saint level entity. Luo Fan sighed. He had an inexplicable look on his face. Ever since he had stepped into the demon realm, he had seen quite a number of level 9 pseudo-saint level entities. Previously, he had almost been taken away by a level 9 pseudo-saint level entity. His physical body had been snatched away. Now, he was about to see another level 9 pseudo-saint level entity. He could not help but feel a little nostalgic. You speak as if you are very familiar with level 9 venerates. Zither Sound could not help but complain when she saw Luo Fan's expression. Level 9 pseudo-saint level entities had a name in the demon realm. They were level 9 venerates. This was also the reason why all level 9 pseudo-saint level entities had the word venerate in their names. Although Luo Fan had seen quite a number of level 9 pseudo-saint level entities. However, that was just an exception. In fact, apart from the disciples of level 9 pseudo-saint level disciples, only the level 9 pseudo-saint level entities in the demon realm could often see level 9 pseudo-saint level entities. Even Zither Sound, who had been in a sect with level 9 venerates for so many years, could only count the number of level 9 pseudo-saint level entities she had seen with one hand. Under the circumstances, it was impossible for her to believe that a mere level 4 pseudo-saint level entity could often see level 9 venerates. Luo Fan naturally did not care about how Zither Sound criticized him. Zither Sound considered it an honor to see a level 9 pseudo-saint level entity and felt that it was something to be proud of. However, he had never thought so. To him, every time he saw a level 9 pseudo-saint level entity, it was accompanied by inexplicable danger. Before he entered the demon realm, he almost died when he saw the clone of the venerate. After entering the demon realm, he saw Lu Zun's clone, which was fighting with the venerate. He was also in a sorry state and was on the verge of death. After that, he encountered level 9 pseudo-saint level entities several times, and it was also accompanied by life-threatening danger. If he had made any mistakes, he would have been crushed into powder and could no longer exist in this world. Under the circumstances, how could he feel that it was an honor to meet a level 9 pseudo-saint level cultivator? How could he want to meet a level 9 pseudo-saint level entity? Of course, it was only superficial to explain Luo Fan's mentality based on his previous encounters. The real reason why Luo Fan was unwilling to meet a level 9 pseudo-saint level entity was because a level 9 pseudo-saint level entity was too powerful for him at the moment. They were so powerful that he could not resist at all. They were so powerful that he would be like an ant in front of a level 9 pseudo-saint level entity, and he would not even be able to control his own life. For Luo Fan, who pursued detachment, freedom, and eternity, it would be a joke if he could welcome such an encounter. While Luo Fan was sentimental about meeting a level 9 pseudo-saint level entity, Qinin was unhappy about Luo Fan's bragging. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The spiritual water palace was extremely far away from the island that Luo Fan was on. As they flew, Luo Fan felt that they had flown hundreds of millions of kilometers. Qin suddenly said, "This is the place." Hearing that, Luo Fan's heart skipped a beat, and he stopped the auspicious cloud. He looked around and found that he and Qin had stopped at an empty sea. Apart from the seawater below, there was nothing else around them. There was no trace of the spiritual water palace at all. Seeing Luo Fan's confused look, Qin became a little proud and said, "The spiritual water palace is not above the sea, but at the bottom of the sea." Luo Fan came to a sudden realization after being reminded by her. That's indeed the case. The spiritual water palace. If it's not in the water, it won't live up to its name. He looked down at the sea below and saw that it seemed very normal at first glance. It was just an ordinary sea, and it was just an ordinary sea. However, upon closer inspection, one would discover that his line of sight seemed to be distorted somehow. This distortion made him unknowingly neglect something. Unfortunately, although Luo Fan knew what was at the bottom of the sea, he also knew that the location of that thing was close to the bottom of the sea. However, he could not find that thing no matter how hard he tried, let alone see what that thing looked like and enter it.